Film Fridays. It's Film Fridays, Fridays. Watch the films. All right, hello everyone, and welcome to what we anticipate will be an epic movie podcast. So good morning or good afternoon evening. Good afternoon evening. Cut! Good morning. Oh, Fred. I couldn't even get my Truman Show line out.
Take
This
two.
is terrible.
Oh, geez.
Take two. Put that in the outtakes.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to what we anticipate will be an epic movie podcast. We're talking about all things 90s related. And so that was kind of a formative year, I know, for the four of us. So I'm here with Adam Klein, Nick Furman, Scott Sipling. For those of you who don't know us, we got a bit of a bromance. And we discuss all things related to movies literally daily. We have been during the pandemic. So from time to time, we thought it'd be good to get together and sort of share some thoughts with the wider world. And so we're going to go through our decade list of the 90s. We're going to briefly share sort of honorable mentions, sort of 5 that didn't quite make the top 10 list. And then we're just going to rip through our top 10. So here's some of the sort of rules of engagement today. I've seen all of our lists. You guys only know your lists. I've sent you all color-coded lists. And so if there's a movie that's a crossover, and we're gonna have a lot of those crossovers, we'll just mention it, recognizing that the person who had it the highest on their list will kind of take the lead in that conversation. And so we're just gonna dive right in. I'm excited to kind of dig into some of these movies. And for all of you watching, listening, I'm sure you're familiar with many of these movies, but there might be a few that you haven't seen that might perk your interest. And so if we can get you watching these movies, we're gonna be really thrilled. So we're gonna kick things off with Adam. And why don't you hit us with your honorable mentions list of the 90s.
Okay, 90s, very formidable decade, I think for all of us. So this is one of those lists that's hard to decipher between best and favorite and emotional and guilty pleasures. Lots of great comedies that for me didn't make the list, but best of the 90s. I'll start with my honorable mentions. So here we go. Number 16, Mother. Albert Brooks's greatest work, the smartest and most meaningful comedy from the 90s, starring Albert Brooks and Debbie Reynolds as a mom and son, and all of the hilarious and honest dynamics that ensue. Number 15, Hoop Dreams. Hoop Dreams could be argued to be like the greatest documentary ever made. Directed by Steve James, filmed over the course of 5 years. It's a heartbreaking, eye-opening, inspirational true story about 2 young African-American men and their families pursuing dreams of careers in the NBA. I'll always remember this film was shown to me first in high school, and it really genuinely changed me, taught me so much about life and art, and still to this day is an incredible achievement and incredible experience. Number 14, The Green Mile. Now, viewer, those watching, don't be fooled. The Green Mile is Frank Darabont's greatest achievement and masterpiece. It is an unforgettable fable about sin, suffering, and facing our own mortality. Number 13, The Insider. Once again, please don't be fooled by what my friends will say later on. The Insider is Michael Mann's masterpiece.
Oh my God.
The Insider is one of the greatest films about journalism. It is a terrific performances from Al Pacino, Christopher Plummer, and it is an apex performance for Russell Crowe. So that's Insider, Michael Mann's masterpiece. Number 12 is Jackie Brown. Now, there are those here on screen that might suggest, and many others who might suggest, that there's a different Tarantino film from the 90s that is a greater work, and they would be wrong.
Multiple, actually.
But anyone who would espouse this would be wrong, because while that particular Tarantino film is undeniably brilliant and influential, Jackie Brown is the true Tarantino masterpiece from the 90s because of its longevity and the fact that it only gets better over time.
And at number 12. Tarantino masterpiece at number 12.
And it was a great decade, man. What do you want me to say?
The hits just keep on coming with 11, I think. I'm feeling it.
And number 11, Barton Fink. Barton Fink is the only masterpiece the Coen brothers made in the 90s.
Oh my God.
And it's an underrated achievement. Now here's the thing. Barton Fink is a personal film for me because with this film, the Coen brothers taught me a lot about cinema, about what's put in the frame and not put in the frame, what's in the edit and not in the edit. And Barton Fink is just a perfect parable with meaningful and off the wall ambiguity, and it is easily John Turturro's greatest performance, and I adore it. And those are my honorable mentions from the 90s. There we go.
All right, some early observations. Kliner came to play. Shots fired. I'm assuming he's been day drinking as well. I'm not sure that's hiding off camera, but
says the man with the man bun. Yeah.
All right. We will come back to those directors.
Actually, we will? Oh, sweet. Oh, cool.
All
awesome.
five of those directors, we will come back and talk about some of their more superior movies from the 90s. But no.
But now the viewers are wiser. Now they know, they're prepared for whatever is going to be said later on. So,
I don't know where Mother came from. That wasn't even on your list. You just kind of threw that in there.
Are we all allowed to do that now?
Out of bounds already. Well, I must confess, I have a tie for number 15 as well. I just call it a tie for 15. I flipped the coin and the coin landed like this. So I didn't go heads or tails. It was amazing. So I'm going to include two of these. They're both foreign films. One we'll revisit, so I'll just mention it. It's called Chungking Express by the wonderful Asian director Wong Kar-wai, set in Hong Kong. And the other one is unique to my list, so I want to talk about it a little bit. It's from acclaimed French director Claire Denis, and it's a film called Beau Travail, which means good work, great work. It came out in 1999. It's a film inspired by Herman Melville's novella Billy Budd, which some might be familiar with, as well as an opera. Basically, it recounts the experiences of French legionnaires led by Sergeant Galoup, played by Denis Levant, who, Scott, I don't know if you've seen this film, but that's your dude from Holy Motors. And it takes place in Djibouti, Africa. It's such an exquisitely shot film, choreographed. It's almost like a ballet on screen. The story, it slowly and deftly explores a lot of themes of repression, of jealousy, of violence, of toxic masculinity, I think, as well as any other film does. And the ending of this film just blows me away. It's possibly the best and most cathartic ending in movie history. And so it's called Beau Travail. It's there's not a lot of dialogue in the film. It's similar to one of my favorite directors' films, Terrence Malick. It's more about establishing a mood and a setting. And I think Denis does this in spades in this film. So that's a French film, Beau Travail, at number 15. Number 14 will be mentioned again repeatedly, Good Will Hunting. Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, Robin Williams. We'll talk about that one later on a little more. Number 13, a little sad to see that it's not on anybody else's list, but this is, in my mind, the best David Fincher offering of the decade. That, of course, is the movie Seven. I think this remains one of Fincher's masterpieces. I'm sure many watching are familiar with it. Morgan Freeman, he had quite a run in the 90s. We'll get back to him shortly, but him and Brad Pitt, they play detectives. And in the movie, I love Seven for a number of reasons. It's a little more grisly than most films I would have on my top 10 or 15 list. But I love how the weather in the film almost serves as a character. It's raining repeatedly throughout the film. It just sets sort of the grim, dark, dreary tone and setting of the film. And I love the first scene of Seven. Fincher is just, he's so flawless and so detail oriented. The first scene starts with Morgan Freeman's character he's just in his apartment. He's putting on his tie. He's nice and neat and orderly. There's a chessboard in the background, which sort of a foretaste of this chess match between him and his serial killer in this film. And the story just unfolds from there. And it's really interesting to see Morgan Freeman's character, this wiser, sort of ready to retire detective, and this young detective full of bravado, and Brad Pitt's character, sort of naive and innocent to the amount of violence in the world. And of course, for those of you who've seen it, I mean, the ending is as harrowing as any film in movie history, I think. Even on revisits, it's just your heart is in your throat watching the end of this movie. So 7, Fincher's masterpiece at 13. Number 12 is probably my favorite.
Fincher's masterpiece.
What do you say?
I think it's a masterpiece.
All right. But anyway, go ahead.
Hey,
One
Fincher's
of.
on the list. We're happy.
Yeah,
He's got multiple films we can call masterpieces,
All
right?
All right. That's fine.
It almost made your list, Scott.
It did.
Number 12 is going to be mentioned again. So it's probably my favorite romance movie, one part of a trilogy, the Before trilogy, Before Sunrise, by Richard Linklater, starring Ethan Hawke, Julie Delpy. And number 11, I'm rocking my Little Lebowski Urban Achiever shirt, the Big Lebowski, another one of the Coen brothers films from the 90s. We'll get back and talk about that one a lot more. Possibly one of the most rewatchable films we'll be mentioning today as well. So that's my honorable mention list. Pass it over to you,
I could have
Furman.
sworn Linklater. I thought you had said Linklater didn't appear on the list, but
Not multiple times.
I'm excited to see those. Okay, good, awesome.
Yeah. No, we have. Let me just mention that we have 9 directors that will be mentioned multiple times. We're multiple films.
Yeah.
And so we've already mentioned a couple of Coen brothers films. So you can keep track. We'll be mentioning a lot of directors that have multiple films in the 90s.
So, okay, you ready? Just making sure.
Yeah, we're all here, dude.
Thank God, finally. Gosh, okay. And I'm the long-winded one. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. So I had about 4 choices for my number 15, and I didn't want to cheat like some other people in this group. So what I did was I thought to myself, what would other guys include? So that knocked a Fincher off the list, and the Beau movie that I used to think it was Beau Travail, so I'm really good at French. And
Come on.
It does fit with the theme.
It's true. It is a trail. The 90s is such a flourishing of like all these new directors like PTA and Fincher and Coen's and all that stuff, but it was also like a major genre decade. So I went with an action film, which I think is one of the greatest action films ever made, and that's T2. So that's my number 15, Terminator 2, Judgment Day. It's like the first. I love the first film, but it's very modest and small. And this one is the exact opposite. It's blown out proportion, incredible set pieces. Just Arnold totally leaning into his bad acting / one-lining glorious self. The T-1000, the technology around Jason Patric, best runner in film history. And I think it's a fantastic work, and one of the only ones where the sequel's better than the original. Okay, the rest of mine, which I'm pulling up right now because I'm really on time. Okay, are going to be mentioned elsewhere in more detail, but I'll just give them to you right now. Number 14 is Groundhog Day, which I think is one of the best comedies ever, and it's a sneaky deep film, so I'm looking forward to talking about it more. Number 13, little homage to my friend Jason here with the Terrence Malick film, The Thin Red Line. One of 2 debatably awesome in 1998 war films that we can get into. Number 12 was already mentioned. That's Richard Linklater's Before Sunrise, which, is coming up again, right? So we can talk about it later. And my number 11, you also mentioned, Jason, it's the Wong Kar-wai film Chungking Express,
Which will also come up later on Adam or Scott's list.
Yep. So
Yep.
Oh, okay. It's my turn. I'm going to go quickly because we said we were going to go quickly, and then Adam and Jason just talked and talked and talked. Anyway, my number 15 will for sure be mentioned later, and everyone watching this has seen it because it's one of the most prevalent movies of the 90s. It's Jurassic Park, Steven Spielberg's dinosaur action adventure film. Number 14 is another Coen Brothers movie that we have not mentioned yet, but will get mentioned later, and that's Fargo, which you can debate.
That's 3 Coen movies already. Yeah.
You can debate is their best film, which is something we can talk about later. My number 13, wait, 12, no, 13.
13
is Michael Mann's real masterpiece, and that's Heat. And we'll be discussing that at length later. The Insider rules, just for the record. Heat is way better. Anyway, and then number 12 is, this one is a little bit for Furman. I know we will talk about this later, and he's going to be able to lead the discussion in a very good way, and that's Eyes Wide Shut, the 90s,
yes.
90s Kubrick film starring Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. First time I watched it was like a few months ago, and it knocked me on my ass, so I'm excited to talk about that more. And then my last one is kind of a cheat because it's 3 films, and one of the 3 films isn't even a 90s film. It's the Coker trilogy, the trilogy by Iranian filmmaker Abbas Kiarostami. It's 3 films, Where's the Friend's House, and I can't remember the other 2 films' names. I probably should have written that down. But there's 3 films, and they basically cover the same characters over the course of 3 films, and it becomes increasingly meta and kind of human at the same time. So it's about filmmaking, it's about how we view the world. They're just amazingly compassionate. He's just maybe my favorite filmmaker of all time, and we will be talking about him later. I'm going to get into more detail about why his films mean so much to me. And I could have probably included 5 films from the 90s of his on this list if I was being truly honest about what I think are the best films, because I think he's one of the greatest filmmakers that we've ever seen.
Nice.
So Scott, tell me about that again. Where's My Friend's House? I believe that's an 80s film, right? But like,
that's the first of the 3. Yeah, the other 2, I think it's Life and Nothing More, and Through the Olive Trees. Is that the order they're in?
That's it.
Okay.
Yeah. Those 2 are in the 90s.
The first film is about a kid that, it's very like a contained story about a child that's trying to help his friend not get in trouble at school by trying to find him and give him his notebook that he accidentally left at school. So it's just this beautiful, like almost like a fairy tale of this kid going through trying to find his friend. The second one is the story of the director of that movie, played by another character, going back to that town after the horrible earthquake in Iran that happened in the 90s, and trying to find the people from the that starred in the movie to make sure they were okay and that they were taken care of. And again, so you're seeing it from a totally different perspective, but everyone is still actors, but you're talking about the making of that first film. And then the last film goes in depth on 2 of the characters from the second film. So it's like a film within a film in the third one. There's yet another director. So the director that's in the second film is actually playing an actor in the third film. It's just, it becomes like so meta, but in this like incredible meta storytelling, it becomes incredibly human and compassionate, and it's just beautiful storytelling, and it's just it's thrilling to watch. It really is thrilling to watch, even though it's quiet and slow. It's just incredible storytelling. It's
cool.
It's
one of my. If you had to, could you pick a favorite of the 3 personally, Scott? Or because they all kind of fit together. I like the first one actually.
They all fit together. The first one is great as a standalone movie. Like you could just watch the first film and be very happy to never see the other 2. I think the other 2 are very like, they're companion pieces. Like it's hard to watch one without the other, or it's hard to think about one without the other. So, but they're all differently incredible. And the performances he gets from like like using real people and not actors, except for like very limited roles. It's like stunning work. And it's the same thing he does in another movie that we'll talk about of his later.
Cool.
Thanks, Scotty. This is part of the reason we want to share this, is maybe many of you aren't familiar with some of these directors or some of these maybe international films. So check them out. Different. Takes some work to invest in some of their films, but there's major payoff. And thanks, Scott. Maybe one of these days, sooner rather than later, you'll turn Kliner into a Kiarostami fan.
If only.
All right, so that's our honorable mentions list, kind of sort of in brief. So now we're getting to the top 10 territory, and for me, these are all masterpieces. I think we would agree. I mean, this is not a top 10 of the year, it's a top 10 of the decade, which is difficult. And so also I just want to say this now at the end, in the comment section, if you're watching this, let us know what movies did we overlook, which movies do you agree with, which movies do you disagree with, and where do we miss? Maybe there's some movies on your list that we're not even aware of, so we'd like to kind of hear from you as well. So all right, Kliner, we're back around to you. Number 10, what do we got?
All right, top 10. Number 10 is The Apostle. The Apostle is the great Robert Duvall's independent masterpiece. It's a spiritual odyssey about a Pentecostal preacher, but the film is incredibly disarming and unconventional, that you just can't help but become a believer in the midst of it. The film is unique in the sense that it's actually kind of without observation or commentary. It feels like real life, maybe similar to what you were just describing, Scott, with Kurosami's. But this film, The Apostle, it feels singular, so much so that you have to remind yourself while watching that this is actually a work of fiction. And largely the reason for that is Duvall's incredible performance, which is less of a performance and more of an embodiment of a character. And I don't watch this film often, but when I do, I cannot deny its power, its presence, and so I had to make sure it was in my top 10, and so it's number 10, The Apostle.
Nice. Now he got nominated for this. Did he win or get nominated for this role?
I think he won.
He won, eh?
Win? Okay, now I'm gonna have to look because I knew he was nominated. I didn't think he won though.
Yeah, I don't know. I looked that up. We'll get back to that. Yeah, I'm just curious. Yeah. Certainly worthy of it. Yeah, I haven't seen that one in a while, but it's a great film.
Fire performance, like he's on fire in that movie.
Absolutely, for sure. All right, well, you're looking that up.
He was a nominee.
He was a nominee. Okay, who won that year?
I don't know that. So that was the awards of '98. So I'm not sure.
Okay. Okay.
It's a great year.
All right, my number 10 is the only one on this list that wouldn't have been on this list a year ago, because I just watched this film recently and I couldn't deny it from having a spot in my top 10. It's my favorite. I know there's many international films that I haven't seen, but it's currently my favorite international film. It's a nice, easy, breezy 4-hour runtime epic. So it's pretty much the length of the whole Coker trilogy, probably. But it's a Taiwanese film called A Brighter Summer Day from 1991. I had been hearing about this film for years. It was released in 91. It didn't get a wide release here in North America. Thanks to another director that we'll surely mention later, you might be familiar with, Martin Scorsese. He really lobbied to have this movie released, and he sort of invested in getting it a wider release. So it got that release in 2011 in theaters. It's now in the Criterion collection. I was able to finally sit down and watch it. And I know 4 hours might be a deal breaker for some of you listening, but it does not feel like a 4-hour movie. It's a coming of age epic set in post-war Taiwan, just a few years before communist China take over. And literally 4 hours. It's got over 100 speaking roles, primarily non-professional preteen or teen actors primarily. The director, bittersweet, his name's Edward Yang. You may not be familiar with him. He passed away at the age of 49, but he's left us this masterpiece among others. He trained and rehearsed for a full year with all of these non-professional actors. If you do any digging or read up on this film, it's actually mentioned in the same breath as The Godfather, which seems a little crazy. I won't say it's as good as The Godfather, but I think it's not an overstatement for it to be compared to and mentioned in the same breath. It's just this sort of sweeping, epic coming of age tale. You're following these kids as they're joining these different gangs. They're searching for community. They're searching for identity. So it explores themes of individuality and relationships and the escalation of violence. And it really is an interesting time in the history of the East and the West. I lived in South Korea, so I saw Western influence in that part of the world. And so you're seeing this. It takes place sort of in that time in the late 50s, early 60s, where there's Elvis Presley music is playing, and there's a lot of Western influence, and it's kind of at the intersection of traditional Eastern values and new Westernization coming in. The actual title, A Bright Summer Day, comes from a line in the Elvis Presley song, "Are you lonesome tonight? Do you miss me tonight? Are you sorry we drifted apart? Does your memory stray to a brighter sunny day?" And that really does set the theme of the film. And so I would encourage everyone, it would be 4 hours of your life well spent if you sit down and watch A Brighter Summer Day. It is an exquisite masterpiece from a director, unfortunately, that was taken from us all too early, but his work remains. Brighter Summer Day, 1991. That's my number 10. Have you guys seen this? I'm wondering if I'm the only one who's seen this even.
It's been on my list to watch forever, and every time I come up on it, I'm like, oh, that's a long runtime, and then I don't want it.
Yeah.
So, but
I wouldn't normally say this, but in this case, you can watch it and leave halfway through and revisit it. There is kind of almost like an intermission or an event halfway through that changes the tone. So, I love to watch it all in one sitting, but don't feel guilty if you can't. You can revisit it. I actually did that. I left after 2 hours and I was just contemplating everything I was watching, and then I came back and finished it. And I don't know if that enhanced the viewing or not, but definitely worth watching at least once.
It's definitely how I felt watching the 4-hour cut of Snyder Cut Justice League. That's definitely, these are very similar.
Yeah, I walked away 7 different times when I watched that. It's like,
makes sense.
Oh, Lord have mercy. You just mentioned Snyder Cut in the same breath of this Taiwanese masterpiece. Edward Yang is rolling over his grave right now.
Come on.
We got to lighten it
moving
up.
Moving on.
All right.
My number 10. Wait, is it Nick?
Yeah, it's Nick next.
All right, Nick.
It's cool. I thought you cut me off for number 1, but I didn't know if you're going to do it yet. My goodness. Okay. No, it's good. My number 10 was just mentioned by Scott. It's Eyes Wide Shut.
Nice.
So it is quite long, but clocking in at 2.5 hours, you still have time to take a nap before.
Easy breezy compared to mine. Yeah.
You watch A Brighter Summer Day. I don't know. I think that I think there's some people that think Kubrick, it's like a lesser Kubrick film, compared to some of his earlier things like 2001 and Clockwork and Full Metal Jacket and whatever else, Shining, all that stuff. And maybe it is, but I used
Barry
to think
Lyndon. Come on.
Yeah. Speaking of long films, I think it's a really crazy late period masterpiece, and he kind of died right after he made this film. He's always pulling strands at institutions in his films, like he's War and Politics and Strange Love, the military and Full Metal Jacket. He's sending up the aristocracy and Barry Lyndon. But in this film, it's marriage. He's sort of talking about love and intimacy and trust and marriage. So I think that people think that this is sort of like a dirty movie. When it was billed, I think Entertainment Weekly had it as like the sexiest movie alive. And it's just not that. It's just not that at all. There's sex all around this film, but it's horrifying. And even the acts, everything you would see are much more ritualistic than orgiastic. Like it's not about pleasure. The way he shoots the cinematography. I mean, basically, I should say,
it's power, right? Yeah.
It stars a real life couple who we all knew at the time, Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. And what he did was he pulled them out of their other projects, stuck them in a 400-day shoot in which he pulled them apart, gave notes to them independently, cleared the set he basically just tugged and pulled at everything he could in their marriage, and then just shoved it on screen. And the movie it centers around 3 of their conversations. Those are kind of like the linchpins of the film. But I just think it's a really prescient film. It's talking about like the Rothschild stuff. It gets into kind of like some of the Epstein stuff we've seen, the sex trafficking stuff, the underage stuff, the exploitation of females and the poor by the rich. He's just putting it all out there, man. And I just think it's really good. That would be my defense of it.
I mean, nice. I don't even think it needs a defense. I think it's like undoubtedly a masterpiece.
Yeah.
I think his theme of everything in that movie is transactional. So like,
right.
Sex is transactional. Like detail, every interaction between people is like, what am I getting out of this? You know, it's about as much about power as it is about sex.
Yep.
And it's just, I don't know, man. It's deeply disturbing, and
Yes.
it is sexy, but not in a vulgar way. It's
Right.
it's disturbing, like very disturbing. And the ending is like one of my favorite endings of any movie
Yes.
from the 90s. Like the last line is just like chef's kiss. It's so good.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, you guys are more experts in this film than me, but what's the correlation between like how long after this did their actual marriage fizzle, and was there any relationship to the trauma maybe of this 400 days with Kubrick, who has been known to be a bit of an abusive director emotionally?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know exactly when they split, but I think, you know, they were heading that way.
Okay.
You can see it. You can see it in the performances. Is what's crazy too. Like
More than on screen. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the long conversation they have in the bedroom,
Yes.
it's just like about as real as any dissolving marriage conversation I've ever seen on screen. It's just like, it's so affecting, and especially as someone who's divorced, I'm just like, holy cow, dude! Like this is so real. So yeah, I think it's like career best Cruise and Kidman. Like I don't even think it's close for either one of them. Nick might beg to differ later in this conversation, but I think it's incredible piece of art.
It is. And yeah, sorry. That's all I got. I agree with what Scott said. Yeah, great Sidney Pollack too. There's an incredible Sidney Pollack scene at the end of the
Oh yeah.
Nice. Good. Hey, definitely worth mentioning on this list. So thanks, guys. Scott, number 10.
My number 10 will be talked about later. It's Good Will Hunting. And we don't need to talk about it because we'll talk about it later.
Second mention for Good Will Hunting. All right.
Woo.
All right. Number 9. Back to you, Kliner. What do you got for us at number 9?
Who already mentioned Good Will Hunting?
I did in my honorable mentions list.
Gotcha. All right, cool. All right, number 9. Number 9. Three Kings. David O. Russell's masterpiece. Three Kings. I love Three Kings. This is a film.
Is it an homage to all of us here, or what?
I don't know why Scott's shaking his head, but like Three Kings.
It's a good movie.
Yeah, it walks a very.
It's a good movie. Not top 10 of the decade.
A great movie. Wildly entertaining, ingeniously combines a whole flurry of things, and ultimately a devastatingly honest portrayal of modern warfare. That's really the power and the heart of this film. The three main characters, well, there's four, but the three main characters, nothing heroic about the American soldiers portrayed in this story. And yet at the same time, they're not entirely to blame for their circumstances. And George Clooney, his character at one point states that we're all creatures of necessity. And that really is the through line here of what's going on as we see the tragedy of modern warfare. And but one of the things that sets this story apart is the combination of political and personal motivations that are exposed, showing all those involved as responsible for selfish acts of survival and necessity. And at the same time, sort of this subversive play where the voices of reason and the moral compass are the voices of Iraqi soldiers and Iraqi refugees. And so this is a film that really just has a lot to say. And for me, it does so with incredible intelligence, a ton of humor and style, and it's just wildly entertaining and thought-provoking. And David O. Russell stands high in my mind, really just because of this film. He's made other good films, maybe great films, but Three Kings is my number 9.
Okay.
Can't say I'm talking about Three Kings today. I did not see that one coming.
What? So what's the beef with Three Kings?
I don't have a problem with Three Kings. It's just like, I don't know. David O. Russell is not one of my favorite directors, but also like, it's like a good movie. It was like a movie that I'm like, oh, that was good, and then never thought about it again. You know? in those four, I'll just say like that. This is a perfect example of what makes up a lot of my list, right? Where in the 90s, in my
good movies we don't think about again.
in the midst of my adolescence, like this was one of those films that just like deeply impacted me, and like I didn't know cinema could be this, right?
Yeah.
And it was, anyways, and it's just always stuck with. And there were some of those films that like had an impression when we're young, but don't stand now as impactful, right? But for me, this list is filled with those movies that like really gripped and impacted me in a big way, and kind of still stand on their legs for me. But anyways, that's my 9.
Cool. Thanks, Kliner. All right, if those of you are watching this and scratching over your heads over that pick, I'm here to be the voice of the people today. I'm here to inform you on a far superior, devastating yet beautiful war movie from the decade. Terrence Malick, one of his many masterpieces, The Thin Red Line.
Yeah, really, real film of the people. Yeah.
This movie, this is possibly the greatest comeback story in the history of Hollywood. Let me tell you a little bit about my man, Terrence Malick. He shows up in the 70s. He makes these amazing films called Badlands and Days of Heaven. And then he falls off the map for 20 years. He literally goes into hiding and comes back. I remember this in the 90s. And everybody who's anybody in Hollywood wants a piece of the action in this movie. So everyone literally lines up to be in this movie, which says something about the acclaim of Terrence Malick after 20 years. So you got Jim Caviezel. He hasn't aged too well, but Sean Penn, he says, I'll be in this movie for $1. Nick Nolte, George Clooney, Adrian Brody, John C. Reilly, Woody Harrelson, Elias Koteas, John Cusack, Jared Leto. You got Bill Pullman and Mickey Rourke, who didn't even make it off the cutting room floor. So if any of you are watching, you're thinking I might be in a Malick movie, get paid up front because you maybe won't even make it in his film. But let's get to the plot. Plot is actually secondary to the experience in this film. So it basically follows a group of soldiers, facing this unlikely battle at the Guadalcanal, and it's based on a novel. And it comes from the title comes from the novel, a quote in the novel saying there's a thin red line, a fine line between being mad and being sane. And what Malick does in this film is, I think he, better than anyone in Hollywood, he merges the natural and the spiritual in his meditations in his films, and certainly on life and of war here. And so there's a lot of voiceover in this film, like in many of his films, and sometimes you don't even know whose voice it is, but that really doesn't matter because it really this is unlike a good movie like Three Kings is a good movie, but it didn't leave me thinking about it afterwards. You watch a movie like this and it's an easy breezy 3 hours, so it's not a brighter summer day, but it burrows. If I find it, his movies burrow to some of the deep places, and so I'm constantly contemplating and meditating upon what I've thought and how it intersects with my own life, with my own ethics and my relationships, and the violence in the world, not only in war but in everyday life. This film was interesting because it's released the same year as another highly acclaimed war movie, Saving Private Ryan. And I think they both have something unique and interesting to say, although this one is my preference because it's more of a contemplative, more of an existential experience. Terrence Malick movies, you don't just watch them, you experience them, and they add value to my everyday life. So, Furman, you mentioned this one as well. Did you want to dive in and share your thoughts on it?
Well, I think you largely hit it. I just, I don't remember who it was that said it. It was a director from a while ago. I heard it on a pod, but they talk about how there is no such thing as an anti-war film, because if it's well made, you get into it and you get into the action and what's going on and that sort of thing. So even if it's trying to posture itself as being pacifistic or anti-war, you're sort of drawn into the action. I think Thin Red Line kind of puts the lie to that a little bit because it's beautiful. I mean, it keeps, like you got tons and tons of voiceovers from tons and tons of places, and then all these random shots of nature. Like Malick's really easy to make fun of, right? You just like put your hands through the wheat and the grass and all that stuff. But he's also like trying to get you out of the action. Because I mean, really, the whole film's basically about the Battle of Guadalcanal, really, right? I mean, yeah. But it's, which is like cool, but it's not like peak battle. So, but he's constantly like pulling you out of it into the guys' heads. And I think in that way, he actually is more so kind of like able to accomplish his aims, which is why I had it over, I think, Saving Oh, I almost said it wrong. Saving Private Ryan. I'm so used to saying it the other way for comedic effect. I think it's a phenomenal film. And I think it's not as jingoistic as people make it out to be. But this film, I think, captures more of the heart of what he was trying to say. So that's all I'd say about it.
Yeah, it's just the collision between beauty and brutality. It really leaves you with this disorienting feeling. And I think that's what he's going for while exploring some of the deep philosophical questions in the heads and hearts of those participating in this battle. So
Right on.
cool. That's my number 9, Thin Red Line. Watch it, and everything else Terrence Malick has produced.
You can skip a couple.
Yeah, there's a couple. I will agree. There's a couple that are tough, but
yeah.
All right, Furman.
Oh, it's
what
my
you got
turn?
for us at number 9?
My number 9 will be up again very shortly, I think. Well, I don't know how shortly. It is Unforgiven, which is my phone is not cooperating.
Is that a Western?
It's a Western, yeah. It's a Western. So I'll save my thoughts for when we talk about it again.
It's kind of what Thin Red Line is to war movies, right? What Unforgiven is to the Western genre, in a sense.
It really subverts the genre, Kliner, is what you got to understand about it. Anyway,
genre subverting films.
Here. I concur.
It does some genre subversion, but it's a little more high octane in some ways than Malick, I'd say. But
yeah, we'll circle back to that one. Great.
Yeah.
Okay, so that brings us back to Kliner. Or no, Scotty. Sorry, number 9, Scotty. What do you got for us?
My number 9 also. Eventually, I will get to talk on this podcast. But my number 9 will come back later. It's Jonathan Demme's masterpiece, Silence of the Lambs.
Nice.
So we'll get to that later.
Oh, I've heard of that. Okay.
Familiar. You may be familiar with that one.
Okay.
I'll be doing.
That wasn't David O. Russell, was it?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
I would love to see David O. Russell's Silence of the Lambs, though.
It would be funny.
I'm just trying to collaborate.
I'd love to see the set. Oh man!
All right, Kliner, I see some more red ink here on your number 8. So you're standing alone on this one again.
Well, no, this follows the theme though of what we were just talking about. My number 8, my number 9 was Three Kings, and everyone loved that. We've talked about Thin Red Line and made reference to my number 8 already in multiple occasions, which is Saving Private Ryan. And so this is the film for the masses. But here's what I would say about Saving Private Ryan, why I can't deny the power of this film. The fact that its real thrust is not found in its portrayal or its account of victory or even honor and sacrifice, but in its portrayal of pain. That's what I find most distinct and powerful about this film. With every life lost, we as the audience feel the pain and the suffering of these soldiers. We see the inhumanity and the madness of war. And this, like many other films, is a masterpiece from Steven Spielberg. I think it could be argued for his top 3 achievements. It succeeds because of its intimate tale of a bond between brothers, right? Their dialogue, to set itself apart from the other war film that released that year, the dialogue and the reflections are not grandiose or ethereal. They are instead simple conversations that are personal and about the immediacy of their mission and their survival. And thankfully, Roger Ebert, the great Roger Ebert, he agrees with me. So I just want to quote Raj, the great Raj. He wrote this about Saving Private Ryan. He said, Spielberg and his screenwriter, Robert Rodat, have done a subtle and rather beautiful thing. They have made a philosophical film about war almost entirely in terms of action. Saving Private Ryan says things about war that are as complex and difficult as any essayist could possibly express, and does it with broad, strong images, with violence, with profanity, with action, with camaraderie. It is possible to express even the most thoughtful ideas in the simplest words and actions, and that's what Spielberg does. Couldn't agree more, couldn't have even come close to saying it that eloquently. And so Saving Private Ryan is my number 8.
Nice.
Saving Private Ryan rules.
I think we should also say
what did Scott just say? What?
I said Saving Private Ryan rules. I think it's an awesome movie.
On the record, Scott's with
The
me on that
first
one.
45 minutes of this movie are like
Yeah.
maybe the greatest action cinema ever captured on camera.
And if anything, I would argue that's the problem with this film, right? Is
Right.
that it overshadows the rest of, like, it's like, what is it, like 2.5 hours or
Yes.
longer? Like, we all remember that harrowing 45 minutes,
Right.
and then we forget just how intimate it
Right.
gets. And of course, that concluding action sequence is remarkable, just as an action set piece, and how it's set up visually. We understand exactly where everyone is and what they're doing, and
Right.
so cinematically, it's a masterpiece. But then the story, again, what Roger said, I just really find that profound and significant, especially for a film that is readily available and consumed by everyone, right? So
I would disagree with Nick, though. I think it's incredibly jingoistic. Like I think it's amazingly jingoistic, and also, like, I don't really care because I know what I'm about to get into when I'm watching most war movies. Like which war movies aren't, like, a lot of them are that way. So whatever.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying, yeah, it is jingoistic, but it's not jingoistic in the way like War Dogs is jingoistic.
Sure.
Like, yeah, it's
not as overt.
Yeah, you're right.
No, I agree.
I would say it's patriotistic for sure.
Yeah, which just makes me want to vomit. But like, it's still, like, I don't know. It's just a super entertaining movie to watch.
Just looking cinematically, looking at it in the craft. I mean, it's incredibly made. Yeah,
incredibly
undeniable.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think like you said, Kliner, it's about, like, the tell me I'm a good man and all of that stuff is about his brothers, not about like the war effort proper and all that sort of stuff. So, but I get what Scott's saying for sure. All right, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, it's good. That's deserving to be on the list for sure. Both of those war movies need to. I think they're great viewing. My number 8. Theme on the bottom of my list. These are most of my epic long running times. So we've had a 4-hour Asian film. We've had a 3-hour war movie. Well, we got another 3-hour epic here from a director that we all love, Paul Thomas Anderson. I think this is a masterpiece from him, Magnolia. I mean, here's a guy, I think he's barely 30 years old when he's making this movie, and he's making Boogie Nights in his 20s and Hard 8. Pretty incredible what he's accomplishing at such a young age. Magnolia, if you haven't seen it, a 3-hour sort of epic, sprawling, it's really a tapestry movie. It's a tapestry of stories at the intersection of sort of loneliness and trauma, childhood trauma. You've got Tom Cruise. Yeah, I won't argue with you guys. Eyes Wide Shut, great performance. But this is another one of his top performances in a smaller role here. Playing this, you just makes your skin crawl. This misogynistic, public speaker to get these guys all riled up about their sex life. But he's got, his father's dying. His father has left him, so he's got his own childhood traumas. You got William H. Macy. He had quite the run in the 90s. We'll talk more about him in a little bit. He's a former child quiz show star, and he's such a broken, insecure person now. He's wanting to get braces just so the bartender at the bar he frequents will take a liking to him, and so he does a phenomenal job. You got John C. Reilly, who's a cop, and he starts a relationship with Melora Walters, the abused daughter of Philip Baker Hall in this movie. You got Julianne Moore, the wife of Tom Cruise's dad, probably 20-30 years younger than him. You got the late great Philip Seymour Hoffman, and let me say this right now, I don't know if we'll say it later, but Philip Seymour Hoffman's son is going to be making his debut in the forthcoming new Licorice Pizza movie by Paul Thomas Anderson, Christmas Day. You're going to want to save that date. So you have all of these characters and all these stories. They seem sort of independent, but the way that Paul Thomas Anderson sort of weaves these together, and it starts with this sort of strange beginning and ending. The movie's bookended in the most sort of strange way. You have this montage of these real life, seemingly coincidental, wild and crazy events being recounted at the beginning of the movie. And at the end of the movie, you've got this sort of biblical proportion story of these frogs just raining down. And the first time I watched this movie, I was like, what's going on with the beginning and end of this movie? But the longer I revisit the movie, people can get duped into thinking it's all about chance and coincidences, but it's not. At its core, the story is really about the interconnectedness of life. and childhood trauma. You know, the quote in the movie that sticks with me is, we may be done with the past, but the past is not done with us. And that really is at the core of what this movie explores. And that's a theme that everybody can connect with, you know, how the past continues to chase us or overwhelm us or influence our relationships, good, bad, or ugly. And so that raining of frogs at the end, you know, two of us are pastors by vocation. So that's probably an homage or drawing from one of the plagues of Egypt there in Exodus 8:2. It says, if you refuse to let them go, I will send a plague of frogs on your whole country. I'm guessing Paul Thomas Anderson is drawing from that story to say, if we don't find some healing, if we don't let go some of our pain, some of our trauma of our childhood, there will be plague-like instances in our lives. And not literally like raining frogs per se, but it's very much on the nose and just reminding us of some of the pain and the trauma that could haunt us. And it dovetails just the interconnectedness of life. And so it's melodramatic, it's over the top in parts, but it's very emotive. And every time I watch it, much like Thin Red Line, I leave thinking about it for days and weeks after my viewing. So Magnolia, number 8, masterpiece by Paul Thomas Anderson.
I love this movie so much, but I would love it even more if it was like an hour shorter. I think it is Paul Thomas Anderson. For me, Paul Thomas Anderson is all about like precision and like economy of time, because even with his like longer movies, and this movie just has, it strikes me as someone that's like, I may never get to make another movie again, let me put every single idea that I have
it's the kitchen sink movie.
Yeah. And maybe that's why I love it so much. He's just going for it. And yeah, he's young and he's matured since, but this movie still, it's behind There Will Be Blood. It's number 2 for me.
It's funny. I love this. This film was a 5-star for me for most of my life since it existed. I love this film, but yeah, I don't know why, but like I never felt that way in years gone by that it was long. And then upon rewatch recently, like it definitely oh, okay. And then of course it's his next film that is my favorite of his. That's 90 minutes. It's just like
PDL, Punch Drunk Love.
Yeah,
is that?
Okay. Which is my favorite PTA film. But it just anyways. But regardless, Magnolia is amazing, and I'm really glad it's on the list.
Me too.
We should also say, connected wise, Eyes Wide Shut, Magnolia, same year, Tom Cruise. And
oh wow,
like the scene with Tom Cruise and his dad is one of the best scenes in cinema history. And even what Hoffman's doing in that scene too is unreal. Yeah,
I agree.
So and I think that kind of broke, honestly.
Well, I was just gonna say, like that Tom Cruise scene, like it's almost like even every time I watch it, like you almost can't see it coming, which is so strange because it's such an extreme melodramatic film. But like, yeah, it just hits home because he has convinced us of this character's, shell, hardened shell. And anyways,
right,
great.
It's a powerful performance by him for sure.
Absolutely.
All right, I'm up, right? Okay, number 8. Okay, all right, Scott, we're on, man. Silence of the Lambs, baby.
Oh,
Jonathan Demme. I'm gonna let Scott do most of this heavy lifting here. To me, this movie's awesome, dude. Like it won 5. It's one of 3 movies to win the Big 5. So if I need to I know Tripp has a different love for Hannibal Lecter, and I get it, from an 80s film, which we'll get to eventually. But I
Insider?
think okay. Man, Jodie Foster's great in this. She's young, and like her sort of fish out of waterness in this film's awesome. The old James Gumb Buffalo Bills stuff is harrowing. I just think the way he directs the characters and manipulates the story. Yeah, Hopkins is doing kind of an affectation, but it's really good and convincing. And I guess I would put this, Kliner was talking earlier about like films you saw as a kid that stuck with you. Like Silence of the Lambs is probably the first movie that was either scary or a psychological thriller or whatever that I ever saw. I just remember I just have like a firm imprint. It's like been imprinted on me sort of, whereas I came to other Lecter films much later. So that's what I just think it's great, man. It's like we said masterpiece too much today. We need a synonym thesaurus thing, but it is. So there you go.
Yeah, this film is unassailable, basically.
Yeah.
I think it's basically it's underrated almost because of how perfect it is.
Right.
There's just nothing to say about it. This is a perfectly constructed thriller. Elements of like horror. I think one of the best scenes in any movie of this type is the night vision goggles scene where
Yeah.
it almost got that Hitchcock sense of like foreboding and terror, and it almost harkens to like Psycho or something like that. It's
Yeah.
just really, I mean, Jodie Foster. I've heard people say that, like, I think on another podcast I listened to recently, someone said that the movie would be better if they replaced Jodie Foster, and I'm just like, I could not disagree more with that assessment. I just think her like Midwestern, like West
Yeah.
Virginia accent, but she's actually very smart and very capable. It really makes the movie because it causes Hopkins Lecter to underestimate her and make mistakes that he might not otherwise make. I think the dual storylines with Lecter and then with James Gumb are just incredible. Again, it's another perfect ending. You know, I'm having some old friends for dinner. It's just like one
Yeah.
of the best closing lines to a movie. It's like oddly funny and like fun to be in while also being extremely disturbing and at times difficult to watch. The supporting performances are great as well. I mean, it's just like it's one of the most quoted movies that we have. It's a masterpiece. It really, I know we're overusing that word, but it is like a perfect movie. And the fact that it is remembered in history for being 5 for 5 in the major categories is like an appropriate homage to its importance, really.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Well, for the record, we should be overusing the word masterpiece. We're talking about the best of a decade of great films.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you guys. I need to revisit that film. I mean, because I adore a lot of that story, those stories, and what came after it. But I need to revisit that one. But you also got me thinking about Jodie Foster. Like, like nobody has a better expression of inquisitiveness or curiosity than Jodie Foster. Like she doesn't even need to speak, but just have the camera close up on her. You know something's up, and yeah, her performance should not be questioned in that work.
It's an excellent portrayal of a powerful woman too, in like a man's world, and I think that's I think the last time I watched it, that was something that stuck out to me in a way that it didn't in previous watches, where the movie is very misogynistic to her.
Right.
Like everyone acts she's patronized throughout the entire movie, and then she, you know, brings this mass murderer to justice, like basically on her own. So it's an awesome movie and like super rewatchable too.
Agreed.
Slightly overrated.
Oh my God.
Must have been a weak year that year for it to get all 5.
Number 8 on our list. That's crazy.
You know, just holding back that comment of overrated.
That's crazy.
Oh man, it's good.
It's all right. It's all good.
Properly.
Who's up?
Moving on.
Is Scott up?
Scotty.
All right. Mine has been mentioned twice before already, but it's Richard Linklater's Before Sunrise, the first part of the Before trilogy. Just like the most romantic movie ever made for me.
Underrated movie.
Yeah, I've looked at a lot of lists of the best films of the 90s over the past couple weeks, and it's been like low on like top 100 lists. It's like in the 50s, 60s, 70s for a lot of people. And I don't understand. I think this is especially in light of Before Sunset and Before Midnight, it's such an incredible achievement. I mean, this movie is just two people walking around and talking for an hour and a half. I mean, that's all the movie is. And it's so watchable. It's just so fun to watch these two people fall for each other in such of like nonsense young person way, where it's like illogical and it's just how it feels when you first meet someone that you instantly connect with and fall for. They're having these deep conversations about life and about their own personal experiences. Each of them take turns coming off as, you know, imperfect to the other. I think the performances from Delphi and Hawk are just like, they're so good. And then the way that they managed to reprise the performances in 2 more films, and the characters are the same but different. It's just, it really is like Linklater's crowning achievement to me is this trilogy. And this is the movie that I revisit the most because I think it reminds me of a more optimistic time in my life where like love was something that was perfect and had potential and was, you know, there was no negative parts to it yet, you know, for me. So it takes me back to a time where it, like, love was just pure optimism and I didn't have any of the real life mixed into it yet. And I just think it's really beautiful, and it's beautifully shot. It's, you know, obviously the French New Wave elements are very obvious. It's just talking the whole movie.
Right.
And yeah, I love this movie. I think this is probably the second most rewatched movie on my list for me. I revisit this at least once a year.
Nice.
Cool.
Now you mentioned it, Furman. I mentioned it. Anything you want to add to that? That was very well said, Scott. I'm totally with you on this one.
No, yeah. I mean, I think the whole trilogy is awesome, but this one is my favorite. The scene where they're at a table and they stage a fake phone call to each other about each other.
That's incredible.
Like, dude, it just doesn't get much better, bro. It's like Scott, it's like it happened one night 60 years later or something, you know, like just something that makes you feel so good about people connecting. We should say, Scott hinted at it, but it's happening in real time. Basically, they're just like wandering around the city in real time, sort of falling for each other, and it's somehow believable because they sort of stumble their way into conversations about deeper things like family, love, sex, and all these other things. So yeah,
and there's such a openness between the two of them because they think, I'm never going to see this person again.
Right.
So there's a vulnerability at the heart of the film that is just, it's really rare to see that kind of thing, and then also for it to be believable. I think the film that it reminds me of the most, and it's very obvious, is A Brief Encounter, which is just another beautiful film from the 50s, 60s.
It's earlier. It's like
40s.
Yeah.
But it's great. It's about like love with none of the real life mixed in, is the best way that I can say it. It's just so optimistic.
It's pure.
Yeah, so optimistic and so vulnerable, so like unrealistic in a way about like their expectations of what might come from this night. But it's so beautiful, and I love to think about romance in that way. I think it's the most romantic movie I've ever seen.
Yeah, and that's what I put on my list. The most romantic movie I've ever seen. Heightened even by watching it with my wife. My wife hadn't seen the trilogy. We watched it together, and the conversations, etc., that it led to were great too. And so, it's great film,
especially after Before Midnight. Oof.
Yeah.
That's my favorite pick me up. That's the best.
Right.
I love that one.
Right, pure and innocent. Yeah, got Before Midnight with pitchforks.
The trilogy becoming more and more like complicated. It's just such a beautiful arc too.
Yeah.
I just love the way it realistically portrays meeting someone, like reconnecting with someone, and then being with someone for like an extended period of time. It's
to take those 2 tour de force performances and just track it over 2 decades, whatever it was, is incredible. Like what he did with Boyhood, kind of. It's incredible. So kudos to Linklater. Awesome. Okay, we're coming back around the mountain to you, Kliner. We're up to number 7 now.
All right, my number 7 is an all-time favorite. I know it's shared by many of you guys, maybe for some considered a guilty pleasure, but my number 7 is Rounders. For me, Rounders is inarguably a great film, and it is, a lot of the reason of that is the script. The world building in Rounders is the best, and it's better than any mob movie, any science fiction. Rounders immerses the audience in an underground world of gambling and poker with dialogue that is strange and foreign and fascinating. And all the while, it's pulling us into this heartbreaking experience of troubled and unreconciled relationships. And there's almost nothing formulaic about the craft of the film. There's certainly nothing polished about it. And the sucker punch of the story and the performances is that at the end of the film, there's really there's no real lessons learned. There's no apologies or beautiful reunions. The story is just about loyalty, addiction, and talent. And that's a rare and beautiful thing. It's also wildly entertaining, never ceases to amaze me. Incredible performances from Matt Damon, Edward Norton, John Turturro, John Malkovich, and Martin Landau. I adore Rounders. I know some of you guys do. It has to be in my best of the 90s list, so it's number 7.
That's a wild choice, but I respect it because it's one of the most important movies of my lifetime. But I also think it might be bad at the same time. So I'm like, I love the Malkovich performance, but also is Malkovich good in this movie? I don't know.
I heard
yes, he
best
is.
Russian accent ever, right?
Absolutely.
I love this movie, but it's like candy to me. I'm like, this movie is really fun to consume, but it's very bad for me.
Well, I know we often split hairs on best versus favorite, and we can debate that, but hey, your favorite movies are your favorite movies, and I think we all enjoy this movie. This is a rewatchable, enjoyable film, and Malkovich he's on fire in this movie. He's so
this movie's about poker.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
I've seen it
about poker because the poker scenes make, if you've played poker in your life, as I have, poker scenes make 0 sense. Like,
but I mean, without a doubt, like Furman, like you and I at one point in college, we were playing poker and the movies playing in the background because that was just a regular thing. You just had the movie on the background while we played. Just the best. Yeah.
Yes. I've watched this movie no less than like 200 times. Like,
all right, that's a lot of candy.
It's like cavities.
Nice. Oh, yeah, back to me.
Oh no, does he have something? What are you doing?
What do I got here? Number 7. All right.
Oh, here we go.
This is me and you, Furman. This is me and you, brother. This, I agree. Furman has already mentioned this as one of the greatest comedies of all time. And it is indeed sneaky deep. My number 7 is Groundhog Day.
Nice.
My number 7 is one of the greatest comedies of all time. Sneaky deep. My number 7 is Groundhog Day. Oh, I just said that.
I thought the things,
I knew there was a bit coming. I just didn't know what the bit
was.
was.
Good. That's great.
This is such an iconic film. This is such a rewatchable film. This is such a fun and entertaining film. This is a film that I will watch on demand if my kids or my wife or anybody wants to watch it. If it's on, back in the day where it would be on, cable TV, I'm there. I'm in. It doesn't matter what. I'll drop everything and watch this film because it's so fun. But Furman, you mentioned it. There's so many layers here below the surface. It really is sneaky deep. Bill Murray, arguably his Apex Mountain best performance ever. Phenomenal. He's this, you loathe him. He's this self-absorbed, narcissistic weatherman who gets stuck perpetually living in the same day on Groundhog Day over in Puxatawney, Pennsylvania. Now, Nick and Scott, you guys are in Pennsylvania. Like, if we ever meet up, I want to take a trip to Puxatawney. I don't know. There's got to be something there paying homage to this film, right?
Probably not much to do.
Not much to do there. Yeah, well,
probably not.
Doesn't look like it in the film, but
nah.
Yeah, and every rewatch is rewarding in this film. I find there's a certain angle, a certain point of dialogue, a certain mannerism or something. There's always a new layer or a takeaway from this movie. And that's why I couldn't keep it off my list. I was struggling with, this or Lebowski as my sort of comedy, and I love them both. But this one just has that depth, and it's something that I could watch with my kids or with my family a little more readily than Lebowski. It's just a sublime blend of laughs and entertainment with those deeper themes. And maybe it's the quintessential pandemic movie the last 2 years, right? It just feels like we've been reliving the same day over and over and over. It really gives me pause to think, I've got one life to live. Choices I make today affect tomorrow and those around me. So Andy McDowell's great in this film as well.
Yeah.
Chris Elliott, such an odd character. See him popping up in all these weird movies back then, but I love it. I revisit it often. Probably seen this literally dozens of times, and I'll see it dozens more. Groundhog Day, Bill Murray. My sisters just confessed they've never seen this, which I'm a terrible older brother that I haven't watched this with them. So we're definitely going to be watching this together soon. So I always find it so rewarding watching this with someone who hasn't seen it before. Watched it with my 10-year-old son. He's just laughing away. Phil Connors. I thought that was you. Now don't you tell me you don't remember me, because I sure as heck fire remember you. Like he's just in stitches. We're watching this together.
Right.
Just create the memories that movie watching creates, elevate them as well. The experience. Just a great viewing experience. Furman, what do you got to add here? I know you love this one as well.
Yeah, like the sight gags, like him stepping in the puddle, and the Stephen Tobolowsky, like, you know, we all watch the rewatchables. Like it's the all-time Dion Waiters, man. Like he comes in for a couple scenes, he's so good. But yeah, like the film, when it starts getting into like philosophy unpacked is when I love it. Like he starts with nihilism, like he's killing himself in 100 different ways, and then he's trying to earn his way to salvation or to get out, so he starts doing these nice like utilitarian, and then by the end it's like, maybe I should just be a virtuous person. So he's undergoing this transformation, so all the while, you know, it's really funny, and Andy McDowell's hair is really frizzy, so that's
and it's always fun to kind of ask and figure out how many days do you think he was stuck in this loop.
Oh yeah, exactly, right? I know, right? Because it had to have been like thousands. He learned something through, like, is it Beethoven or Mozart? And then he's ice sculpts and just all kinds of crap. By the end, he knows everybody in the city. It's like, it's 10 years, 20 years. He's in the same day. Yeah. This
is one of the movies where it would be so great to watch it being filmed and constructed, right? Just to be a fly on the wall, all those scenes. Yeah. So yeah, cool. That's my number 7, Groundhog Day. Masterpiece. Watch it if you haven't seen it. Over to you.
We're coming back to my number 7. That is a certain wintry film known as Fargo.
Oh, nice. That's good news.
Good call. We'll come back to that one soon.
Yeah.
My number 7.
Oh, geez.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, geez.
My number 7 is a film that's been mentioned twice now, is Chungking Express.
Woo!
Which I was just talking to you guys about this before. I was rewatching this literally moments before, and I was like, I might have put this too low. Chungking Express is Wong Kar-wai's film. I think it's like, I don't know, it's what, 3rd, 4th film, somewhere in the middle of his career. And it is a mood. It's just like a mood. I just love to be in this movie. There's not like it's like basically an anthology, you know, of like two-part anthology story. He connects them in like subtle ways as well, which is fun. But it's just about like lost love and heartbreak, and it's romantic, and it's weirdly and beautifully shot. The colors are indelible, where you just these bright greens or these bright reds, or the scene where they light all the candles in the shop, and it's just like, you know, it's stunning to look at. It's just, the needle drops in this movie are just like so good. The Cranberries and
California Dreaming,
which Tarantino just directly used for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Man, I just love being a part of this movie, and I don't even know if I could like try and recite the plot of this movie to you. It doesn't really have much of a plot. It's a feeling. It's just. I mean, Wong Kar-wai is so good at that, right? Like, I wish we could talk about In the Mood for Love, because it's a similar experience in that it's just like a feeling, and the plot is kind of secondary to the feeling you get while you're watching the movie. But it's just full of like pop cultural references. You can see why Tarantino loves Wong Kar-wai so much as well. It's just a lot of the similar tactics are used in Tarantino's movies. You know, moving pieces around, kind of telling you what's going to happen in the plot before it actually happens. He does that in the opening scene of this movie. It manages to be shocking twice. Like, the ending of the first part of the anthology and the ending of the second part of the anthology are shocking moments. And I just love this movie. It's so hard to describe why I like this movie so much, but it is just such a good movie to be in and to spend time with.
It's very immersive. You just feel like you're in this frenetic, fast-paced Hong Kong atmosphere, right? He's got this, almost the character in the foreground's moving slowly, and there's sometimes some scenes there's like fast forward in the background, just the way it's shot. yeah, it slows life down for those characters, but everything around them is just frenetic and out of control. It's wild. It's wild. What's cool about this film too, I was reading sort of the story behind the story, is like he actually made this film because he's so frustrated in post-production on another Ashes of Time, his big epic movie. So what does he do? He takes a month to shoot this and it becomes a masterpiece, right? It was supposed to be a 3-part anthology, and the third part is actually his next film called Fallen Angels. So I watched those. I don't know if you've seen that one, but it's interesting too. A little sort of the evil twin of Chungking, I guess. It's more of a darker anthology piece, but just incredible. This is kind of a one-off for him. I'll just do this. And what does he make? He makes this masterpiece, right? Yeah. Furman, what are your thoughts? I know you liked it as well.
Oh yeah, I love it. He starts the film with this thing where he's like manipulating time, so you get this like slow motion blurring effect with this like crazy score. Like I don't know, we talk about it in our 2000 video, but like one of my all-time favorite scores is from Requiem for a Dream. And I feel like Aronofsky kind of gripped from some of it, because it's a similar kind of like haunting, like frenetic pace. There's a cop chasing and then it's like, boom, we're in. But yeah, so like I watched it first because Quentin told me to. And that's the reason I first watched it, because he was like, you guys need to check this guy out, Wong Kar-wai. And then so I watched it, and I just remember being like, like not like I didn't hate it, but it was kind of like, I just wasn't all in it. And this time I think it hit me a lot more because of, yeah, like you were talking about the loving and the longing and this idea of being like around tons of people. Let me quote a 90s Bush lyric from Glycerine right here. Beautiful. I'm never alone, I'm alone all the time. You know, like they're around people all the time. And yet they feel utterly alone. Like there's a real isolation to the character, the two cops who form the centerpiece of the story. But yeah, sometimes I feel like each time I watch it, it climbs up my list a little more.
Yeah, I mean, the influence that Scorsese must have on Wong Kar-wai too. I mean, just like the way he uses music in this movie.
Yeah.
Just repeatedly coming back to the same songs over and over and over again. Right. And I would like to especially shout out the sex scene in the movie. It's not really like a dirty sex scene, but the airplane perspective shot.
What a scene.
With What a Difference a Day Makes playing in the background. It's just, I was like, I didn't even know you could do stuff like this. It's just so simple and beautiful. And yeah, I just really love that scene. That's something I can just watch on its own and be very happy.
And also, like,
I appreciate what you said, Furman. I guess I needed to hear that. How the way you described your first experience and your second experience, because I only just recently watched it the first time, and I mean the way you describe, like, obviously it'll be interesting to watch it a second time. I found myself fully immersed the second half of the film, but the first half of the film was more of like I was admiring it, but didn't feel swept up in it in the same way. And,
yeah. Well, you had Shang-Chi on the brain, so Tony Leung was your boy, right?
Tony Leung is amazing in it. Like but that was part of it. Like the charisma of both of those performances in the second half of the film are just. I mean, they are very, very different halves, right? And so, anyways,
yeah.
The thematic cohesion is just the heartbreak and the loss and the longing and struggle for connection. And just like finding connection in a very unlikely way. I just really, they work together very well. But I understand why the second part would be more enthralling than the first, for sure.
Cool. It's good. Again, probably a movie that maybe some of the viewers haven't seen. So give it a look. Check out Wong Kar-wai. Visually stunning and very much establishes some moods in his film. Okay, number 6. So number 6, Adam and Scott, this is tied for number 6 on both your lists. This is the first one on your list, Adam, that is a crossover with someone else.
Oh, this was Scott. For some reason, I wasn't logged in my head right. I was thinking it was gonna be Furman.
Bad. It's Nick and Kliner at 6. It's already been mentioned by Scott and
I just honestly assumed that. I just assumed, oh yeah, Furman and I have Good Will Hunting at number 6. Of course we do.
My bad.
Yeah, exactly.
Furman, you take the lead.
Furman, you take the lead.
Just give a quick synopsis of Good Will Hunting for you, like.
Geez.
Or awkward silence. That's cool.
Yeah, no, you can. Why don't you can do it? It's good. No.
I'm trying to pass the ball. I'm trying to be a team player here. Yeah, Good Will Hunting.
No,
I'll just say that, like, and why I knew, like, Furman and I, like, as soon as I saw that I was tied with someone, I knew it was Furman. It's just this beautiful. I can't even count the number of times I've watched Good Will Hunting. It makes me weep every time. It's this deeply emotional, raw, simple story, but like it's all about the vulnerability is necessary for true relationships, the vulnerability in fighting and arguing and reconciling, and Ben Affleck and Matt Damon starting off their careers with this, winning an Oscar for this. It's bonkers that that's the case, but it stands the test of time. And Robin Williams, the heart and soul of the film. Yeah, Furman, what about you?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, yeah, it's like an all-time performance by Williams, in my opinion. Like the scene where he's jumping around the bases in the office, at Fenway. As a Sox fan, that means a lot to me. But yeah, just the off-camera stuff of them, these two young guys writing a screenplay and then getting like William Goldman to punch it up, and cut off this side plot about CIA and things like that. And then you get this amazing film. I think what I like about it too, well, I love the Ben scene where he's talking about like every day I walk up to your door and I think the one day you won't be, like, that scene is incredible. There's just a lot of powerful scenes, but I think what's good about it is like it balances these real life friends in Boston with the more cinematic stuff. As someone who works with troubled youth, you can't just often shout, "It's not your fault," and then they'll just break down and become perfect angels after a while. But that scene is indelible, right? I mean, just as a cinematic moment, I wish it worked. I would try it more. Maybe if I had a better beard.
I think it's an earned moment though, because you see the relationship build. So I think it's, some people criticize that for like its depiction of what therapy is really like.
No, yeah.
I'm just like, okay, yeah, that's not really what therapy's like, but also like these guys are less therapist and patient and more friends at this point.
Yeah.
It's like a hybrid relationship, and it's an earned moment for me. So I don't have any problems with that scene like some do.
I don't either. I love it. I think it's great. I think it's a great cinematic moment. I think it's earned. I think the scene where, if you're going to quibble with it in terms of psychiatry, I would say the scene where he goes at him and attacks him, like, because you don't know anything about what you didn't read in a book. Right. From a movie, from scripting, it's incredible, right? But you probably could lose your license. But yeah, dude, it's like all these great guys just on fire making this incredible movie in Boston, right? I mean, and it's incredibly quotable, incredibly rewatchable, and it's awesome.
I think it is incredibly rewatchable, and for me, like I often struggle with movies that are overtly earnest, and this movie certainly is that at times. But I think what balances it out very well for me is the levity throughout the movie. It's really funny. The relationships are very believable. The dialogue is very believable. The supporting performances are great. Casey Affleck just kills me in this movie. Like every time he opens his mouth.
Double cheeseburger.
Yeah. Or like I swallowed a bug. That's my favorite moment. I think that's my favorite moment. So I just find this movie to be charming. I don't think I think Minnie Driver and Damon are really good together, and I don't love Minnie Driver's career, but I think she's really good in this movie. And
where is Minnie Driver?
Yeah, I don't know.
You alive?
Doing a podcast.
I don't know what she's up to these days. But yeah, I just think it's one of the rare, like, earnest, like, crowd pleaser type of movies that it just works really well. It's extremely well written is the main reason. Although it won Best Screenplay over Boogie Nights, which is a travesty. But we'll talk about that later.
Where did Scott have this ranked?
Number 10.
Okay, right. Okay.
Yeah, 10. It was in my honorable mentions list. So I'll just simply add, again, another life experience that connects with this film. My wife and I did a long weekend in Boston, our first time visiting Boston. We went on this walking tour of a movie walking tour. So they talked about famous iconic movies. And so we're sitting there on the bench where Robin Williams and Matt Damon, like, this is the bench. It was very surreal just to kind of these are the places where there's, oh, here's Harvard, here's where Matt Damon was. And yeah, so it's kind of neat just to actually walk in the steps where this actually took place. But I agree with everything you guys said. It's a great film, and I think it's worthy to be our one and only 4-way crossover.
My boy's wicked smart.
So I guess that leaves it to me on my number 6. Bring up my notes here. All right, Furman, it's me and you again, brother.
Okay.
Clint Eastwood, one of my favorite all-time performers. Still going. Well, not so strong, but still going at age 91. Saw him kind of ride a horse in Cry Macho.
Yeah.
Which is not a very good movie, but still have mad respect for this guy. I mean, Unforgiven is arguably, and probably ask most people, his best and most iconic film. He directs and both stars in this film. Yeah, I'm just gonna read a quote from the movie, and we can run from there. You know, he turns to this young kid who's got this sort of macho attitude and wants to be a gunslinger, and he says, you know, it's a hell of a thing killing a man. You take away everything he's got and everything he's ever gonna have, and that kind of is one of the core moments in the film. Much like, you know, Thin Red Line is kind of genre subverting, and it's more of an anti-war movie. Unforgiven is interesting on many levels because it's subversive in its own right, subverting sort of the macho sort of gunslinging mentality. And it's fascinating because it's Clint Eastwood, right? When you think of the most iconic Western figures in history, he's one of two, right? Yeah. Him and the Duke kind of come to mind, John Wayne. Yet here he is, you know, directing and starring in a film that's totally poking holes into the very genre that made him famous. So I find that fascinating. I mean, plot wise, I'm sure most have seen it or heard of it. If you haven't, you know, he plays William Money, kind of a famous sort of gunslinger from the past. He's getting a little on in age now. You know, there's at the start of the movie, we see this sort of harrowing, horrific scene where a prostitute played by Ann Thompson, she's disfigured by a pair of cowboys. It takes place in Wyoming, and her fellow brothel workers, you know, they post a reward for their murder, to the displeasure of, you know, little Bill Daggett, played by Gene Hackman. I think did he win the Oscar for this? I think he did. Yeah. And he just rules with an iron fist. He doesn't want to allow these vigilantes in his town. And then you get these two groups of gunfighters, you know, one led by Clint, along with, you know, Morgan Freeman. And then the other, great performance by Richard Harris as well. This sort of florid English Bob is his name. And they come to town and they're both looking to collect the reward. And all hell breaks loose in the movie. But at its core, it's in the midst of the violence, there's an anti-violent, anti-revenge sort of genre subverting plot underneath the surface. I think the performances are stellar across the board. The directing is exquisite here by Eastwood, and I think it's a masterpiece. I think it's an important Western movie, and it's certainly one of my two favorites, along with The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Nick, what are your thoughts on Unforgiven?
Kurt Russell and Val Kilmer are great in this film. It's just
I'll be your
You ain't no Daisy.
Let's do that to start. I mean, I think if you think of the 90s, a lot of people would talk about Unforgiven, but a lot of people would talk about Tombstone. And then there's some that would talk about Donner's Maverick. But to me, like
totally different. Oh, yeah.
No, so different. But Tombstone is a really long film. I would argue that Kilmer's Huckleberry is, you know, as good as it gets in terms of performances, individual Doc Holliday, his individual performance, but that movie's uneven, I would say, if you watch it, whereas there's not a moment wasted in Unforgiven. You know, I think that it's an all-time villain performance by Hackman. You know, I just quote, my father's a big Western guy, and we were talking about Unforgiven a while back, and he said something like, it goes right to your quote, Jason. Like he says, you know, in a lot of Westerns, Nick, you watch like guys get shot and it's just not a big deal. Or it's like in Tombstone, there's this whole scene where they're running through shooting guys and it's like a joke. You know? How many guys can we get? And this stuff, like every single person that dies in Unforgiven is like a tragedy. Like it's serious. And there's this anti-war or anti-violence thing that he's starting to sort of subvert and go after, which kind of comes to full fruition in a much more poorly acted film later on called Gran Torino. But it's almost like he's thrust into it against his will at the end of this film, but he's still got to show up as the guy he is. I mean, when you first meet Eastwood in this film, he's tripping over his own pigs in a farm. Like like if you're talking about like attacking the Man with No Name, for instance, that's kind of it. So
Right
yeah,
out of the gate, you know this is going to be a different type of Western movie
dude,
when you
it's
see that, right?
if you hate everything Eastwood did, this film is awesome. Like I just don't think many people would hate it, even if you don't like the guy at all. So
That's well said. It's good. So it's my number 6, Unforgiven. I think it deserves to be mentioned in any top 10 or 15 of the decade list.
yeah, right on.
It's my turn for number 6. This is the
We're
fact.
gonna hear angry Scott now because he's alone on this one.
The fact that this is only on my list. One, I felt guilty that it was at number 6 because it probably should be number 1 just based on historical importance and what the rest of the world thinks about movies. Then it's only on my list is absolutely bonkers. It's insane. And the film is Goodfellas by Martin Scorsese.
Okay.
Ever heard of him? I just don't understand. Like it really boggles my mind that this isn't on no one else's list. So I rewatched it last night actually with my girlfriend, and she was like, "That was amazing." She loved it, which I was shocked by. I thought she would tolerate it while I watched it. She loved it, and I think she loved it because it wasn't like she likes The Godfather and The Godfather Part 2, but I think how operatic those movies are just isn't her thing, right? She likes the elements of Goodfellas that I struggled with the first time I saw it, which is the come down. The first half of this movie is just the ultimate hangout movie with these people that you love being around that are clearly like monsters, but also very funny, charming. It's just fun to be around them. And then the latter half of the movie is just a cocaine come down, basically, like watching Henry Hill's life fall apart right before your eyes. I think the things I took away from this movie on the most recent rewatch is that the second half of the movie, for me, I recognize the intentionality of it a lot more than I did on previous rewatches and I read a little bit of what Scorsese has to say about the making of this movie. And I think the intentionality of there being no real plot and there being no real, no happy ending, no real resolution at all, except that Hill is in witness protection and his life fell apart around him is the whole point of this movie. And your miles can vary with that. Like it's not my favorite Scorsese movie. It's Taxi Driver is probably my favorite Scorsese movie, but I think recognizing the intentionality in the choices that Scorsese made had me appreciating the technical aspects a lot more. I mean, this is a technically flawless movie. I mean, it's the best thing that Scorsese has ever done visually. It's the best thing he's ever done with music. And those two things are saying a lot because Scorsese is probably the best mover of the camera, and he's probably the best use of needle drops of any director ever. So it's just an amazing, incredibly rewatchable movie. It's super funny. Pesci is just steals every scene that he's in. I think Liotta's performance is underrated now. I think he's so good as Henry Hill. And then De Niro is doing some of the most subtle and nuanced work he's ever done. And you put all that stuff together with Scorsese and the cinematography from Michael Ballhaus and the amazing writing in this movie. It really is an incredibly, incredibly important piece of 90s cinema. And so that's why all the rest of you are idiots and I'm smart.
Well, what I appreciate what you said, Scott, is that you identified the reason why it's not top tier Scorsese for me, but why it's all the reasons why it's historic and important. But like it is the come down of the second half that in spite of all the reasons why that are fascinating and intriguing, like it fails to keep my captivation in that come down. And every time, for the dozen times that I've watched it over the years, like that, every time it's the same experience where I'm like, I'm enthralled. It's just climbing, and then it's just it just loses me a little bit. But it's technical, as you said, it's a technical masterpiece. I guess can't
Yeah, and again, this is for me, like if this was a just objective best crafted performed films of the decade, this would be on my list. Pulp Fiction would be on my list. Silence of the Lambs would not be on my list. But I think this is a masterwork from a master director. But all things being equal, I'll take The Irishman because it's more emotionally resonant. And I'm fascinated with late career Scorsese, as you guys know, like Silence and The Irishman, because there's a bit of a redemptive arc there. This is just a punishing watch. I love the performances, but I leave this film just feeling like
yeah, it's bleak.
So,
it's just bleak.
It's not one I go back to often, but I will acknowledge it's a masterwork by a master craftsman with masterful performances. Just not one of my personal favorites.
Okay, I have 3 thoughts. One, I only took it off because I knew you had it. So I would have had this on my list.
Well, that's not
2,
a good reason.
Yeah.
And your list is a fraud.
It's a better film than Terminator 2. I just, I knew Scott would have it, so I didn't. 2, everyone should Google the Copacabana Oneer. Just YouTube it and watch that scene where he goes through. Actually, I personally like the dolly shot when he's going through the bar even better, even though that's the less famous shot, I guess, or whatever. And 3, like, I personally prefer the more operatic stuff, but this is because, like, I feel like the whole Puza is like, let's just sort of soar high art over this nasty, nefarious thing. And Scorsese's like, let's just get down in it and just hang out for 2.5 hours. And so it just makes you feel like you need a shower afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, I think the elements of this movie too. Again, like Scorsese is extremely influenced by the French New Wave in this movie too, which it's just really fast and it moves really quickly. The freeze frames, the voiceover, like it's just Scorsese at his most artistic and his most like, I don't give what I'm supposed to do. Here's what I'm gonna do.
Yeah, how about
and it becomes a piece of art that is, one of the most important films ever made. And actually, my favorite shot in the movie is the end of the movie when he's all coked out and he goes to meet Jimmy at the diner, and there's that the dolly zoom is used a lot, where like in Jaws, the dolly zoom is real quick to show you something. This is a slow moving dolly zoom, and it's just like, it's really disorienting, and you can feel kind of how hungover Hill is. I think Scorsese's the master of evoking emotion with cameras, and he does it throughout this movie. And I appreciate this movie a lot more than I did a year ago, for sure.
Nice. Interesting segue into Kliner's number 5.
Well, Furman's feasting. My number 5, all credit to Furman. I'm glad Furman got attention on screen at the moment, because the only reason number 5 is here is because of him. My number 5 is Carlito's Way.
Oh, cool.
I got to thank Furman for the inclusion of this film, because I had not seen Carlito's Way until this past summer, when Nick challenged me to go through the filmography of Brian De Palma. And of course, what a journey that was, a delightful, dark, and despot discoveries along the way. But but Carlito's Way was, for me, the height of it, and I rewatched it, and I'd argue that Carlito's Way is De Palma's one and only perfect film, maybe. And ironically, in a documentary, he agrees with me, that he says that's his one and only perfect masterpiece.
He's wrong.
So at least I know I'm right.
Yeah, it's better than Goodfellas. I'm with you.
Carlito's Way is a film that is simultaneously made for the masses and artistically distinct. And I love when filmmakers are balancing that, are threading that needle. It's a fairly typical mobster movie, but it's a deep, rich, contemplative character study. Right. And it provides us with Al Pacino's easily top 3 performances, not to mention the fact that Sean Penn's greatest on-screen achievement, which I don't think anyone would argue. But Carlito's Way was an incredible recent discovery. It fits nicely right in the middle of my top 10, and I wouldn't have said this before, but now I'm officially a big De Palma fan, and this is a big reason for it. So there we go, number 5.
Nice. I'm so glad. I was so glad to see that on your list because this was my number 16. And like, somebody, hopefully, I thought Furman might mention it, but
it was 16 to 20 for me too.
yeah.
Scott hates Pacino's performance, but and that's fine because he's
Scott likes to be wrong. It's cool. He's really good at it. He's really good at being wrong.
I think it's racist, honestly, but I'm just kidding.
Yeah, let's not talk about race in
Al
Carlito's Way.
Pacino playing what is he, Puerto Rican?
Yeah.
Viggo Mortensen and like, yeah, let's not get into that one.
Oh my
Well, but look, like the Goodfellas comparison is a good one, right? Because it's like there's I guess Scott thought the music was kind of chintzy, but I think there's more. For me, there's more emotional engagement in it, but I understand. I guess I understand.
Well, but he's playing. The needle drops in Carlito's Way are again, not to overuse the word, but they're subversive. Like he's intentionally playing against expectations or into expectations for a different purpose. Where Goodfellas, it's just like no one's going to do what Scorsese does, and just it's all about energy and moving forward, and it's beautiful. But Carlito's Way, De Palma is. I mean, there's so much you're going to pack because Carlito's Way is like De Palma examining his own career and then presenting this like inverted examination of what people think he is or what he can't do or can do. And
it's a little bit like Clint and Unforgiven, right?
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. Yeah. So anyways, Carlito's Way, it's amazing and Scott's wrong and it's cool.
It's lesser De Palma. It's fine.
But I mean, well, we talk about movers of the camera, dude. Like, let's give some credit to De Palma too, man. He's a
Palma's a master. De Palma's a master. This is just lesser De Palma. It's fine. It can be lesser De Palma. That's fine.
No, I know. I'm just saying.
Number fives.
So this got Furman. I think I said this got ranked number 1 of the decade in some big French publication in France.
Right. By the way, people.
There you go, Mr. French New Wave.
Yeah.
Which I wouldn't put it 1, but I was like, wow, like that says something, right? To have it that high. So cool. Great film. Carlito's Way. Don't listen to Scott. Watch this one. Watch Goodfellas too. You can make your own decisions. But,
watch them both.
They're both worthwhile mentions on this list. All right. Over to me, number 5. This one has already been mentioned not once, but twice. Oh geez. Number 5. My favorite Coen Brothers movie. I wasn't sure if it was still my favorite. I had to go back and revisit it just recently. I'm like, is this still my favorite Coen movie? And this has aged so well for me. It's Fargo. Kliner, it's not on your list, but I think you mentioned this in your review, how it's so lean, the economy of scale here. It's only an hour and 38 minutes.
Yeah.
And but this movie is so perfectly constructed. I mean, here's the Coens early on in their career. It's quite the decade for them. But the winter bleakness they capture in this film, much like Seven, where it's raining all the time, here just the snow and the blizzardy weather in Fargo. I mean, it just adds to the bleakness of the mood of the film. And it really is at its core. It's a powerful meditation on how deception and violence can it's always there. It's always attempting to creep in and can cause chaos even into the most kind and innocent of places. And we got this sort of backwoods town where there's seemingly innocent, friendly, naive folks. And you've got this deceptive character played by William H. Macy. What a masterful performance, right? He's just this anxious, sleazy, caught in his own lies. And you just see literally the snowball rolling down the hill, and he's lie after lie, deception after deception. He arranges to get his wife kidnapped, and you got these two kidnappers are just perfectly cast. You got Steve Buscemi and Peter Stormare. Buscemi is great. I mean, on the rewatch, I was just blown away by his performance in this. So he's just this weaselly, kind of a funny looking guy in a general sense. As it says in the film, he's just a funny looking guy. And you got Peter Stormare. He's just smoking, says barely 10 lines in the whole movie, but you just see it in his demeanor, his eyes, like he's ready to go off the rails at any moment. And of course he does in the iconic wood chipper scene at the end where he finally gets captured. But it's just interesting to see what the Coens have done here, because they make a bleak movie full of violence and it's very harrowing, but then you see the purity of Frances McDormand's character and her husband seemingly untouched by all of this chaos around them. And it really is, again, this clash of cultures. And there's this one scene that jumped out at me when I rewatched it this week. Frances McDormand's character, she goes out for dinner with this old friend of hers, and he's kind of a sleazy guy, and he's trying to come on to her, and she just resists it right away. And it's just really, it really shows and portrays just how pure her character is, and she's able to resist all of that. And there's a line near the end of the movie that is probably just a good summary of the entire film. She's finally captured Peter Stormare's character, and he's in the back of the squad car, and she's driving, and she just looks in the rearview mirror and she says, there's more to life than a little money, and here you are, and it's a beautiful day. And so it's just a seemingly nonchalant statement near the end of this film, but it's the Coen showing that there still is beauty in the world in the midst of the chaos, and just living a simple life of kindness can resist the chaos that is always there, crouching at the door, creeping in. And Roger Deakins, we haven't mentioned his name today. He's on this film and another film in my list, but it's phenomenal. I got a quote from Deakins. I was really nerding out watching this. I actually rewatched it with the audio commentary from Deacon on the DVD. So you're watching the film and he's commenting on each scene. And he made a statement early on in this film, and I scribbled this down. I wanted to share this because that was fascinating. This is a pretty minimalistic film. It's pretty simple in the camera angles. And Deakins,
camera's good.
He says, a lot of time filmmakers get too involved in showing off with the camera, but it's really about characters and performance and atmosphere. And that's what this film is to me. It's about characters, performance, and atmosphere. Here's Deakins, arguably the greatest cinematographer ever, or certainly working today, who's done some really showy films, right? Like Blade Runner, 1917. And here he knows enough to work with the directors, and they're going for something much different. They're going for something simple. And yet there's some subtle camera work. There's one scene, we talked about the dolly zoom, slow dolly zoom, William H. Macy character's in his office. Things are starting to unravel for him. He's trying to keep the beach ball under the water, in a sense there, keep his lies in check. And you see the outside of the office, the dolly zooming in, but it almost doesn't look like he's in prison, because you see the curtains, they're lined up like prison bars, and it's slowly zooming in, zooming. Just one simple technique to really set the atmosphere and the mood. And I think the Coens do this beautifully in all their films. And they come back to a similar theme, obviously, in No Country for Old Men, which many think are a better crafted film. But Fargo continues to hold a special place in my heart. It's my favorite Coen Brothers film, and it's my number 5.
So let me clarify. I'm actually kind of surprised. Who had Fargo on their list?
Everybody but you, Kliner. You had
right,
Fink.
because Barton Fink is better, but that's cool. But meaning number 5 is the highest it was ranked.
Yeah.
Okay,
Correct.
that's shocking to me. That is shocking that 5 is the highest that it was.
I mean,
because
Fargo,
you acknowledge it's a great film, and you're misguided.
It is a great film. It is a great film. Barton Fink's better.
I don't know. I think Fargo is maybe their best fully realized and made thing, with the exception of maybe No Country for Old Men. But I just think there are other films that have similar ideas in them that I like more. Like, I think there's a lot of this movie that it really directly, I mean, the Coens are kind of getting at the same thing in all their movies, is that, the world is and everything's and life is meaningless. Like, that's kind of like what their whole deal is about in every movie. And I think there are other movies that do it a little bit better, but I get why this is probably their most popular movie. I mean, the fact that it's an hour and 40 minutes,
right?
It's just perfectly made, and Frances McDormand rules, and it's charming. The characters are charming. No one creates more interesting characters than the Coens. And this movie's great. I love this movie.
True. Cool.
Yeah. No, Scott said what I was going to say. I mean, I think the fact that it's so compact, just that there's no wasted space in it. Marge Gunderson it's my favorite. Is it like sacrilege to say it's my favorite Franny McDade performance? Like, she's unreal.
Not at all.
And their stuff is pitched at like, it's a real pitch black comedy, but like you said, dude, there's a lot of moments of light in this one too that kind of counterbalance it, that you don't see in some of their other films. So I'd have No Country higher personally, but it's way up there for me.
I prefer their bleaker stuff for sure.
Yeah. I'm surprised you didn't have Lebowski, Scotty.
Well, day is young.
Oh.
Over to you, Furman. Number 5.
Oh yeah. Mine's coming up again soon
Sure is.
because it's awesome. And some 2 people didn't have it. I don't
The
think.
real Michael Mann masterpiece
Yeah.
of the decade.
It's 2 hours and 50 minutes of creamy goodness. Heat. And we'll come back to that one shortly.
No Insider.
I love The Insider.
The Insider.
I do.
That's
All
what I
right.
love about this, right? Like, it's like we're joking about films that we all love anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Just a massive stew of amazing stuff.
Oh,
All right,
geez.
Scott, that
We interrupt this lighthearted moment to once again hear Scott tell us why we're idiots. What's your number 5, Scott?
I won't lecture you guys as much on this one. This is I think I realized I rewatched it 2 nights ago, and I think I realized on that rewatch, I was like, I don't really understand why you guys aren't super into this movie like I am, but I get why maybe a lot of people wouldn't be. It's Robert Altman's The Player, which it's an extremely. I just happened to watch Adaptation, the Kaufman flick, Spike Jonze directed like a couple weeks ago, and I realized how much these two movies are partnership. I mean, how much Adaptation just directly steals from this movie is interesting. I think the thing about this movie is that if you're not someone that's into movies and into like the Hollywood machine, then it's a harder movie to appreciate. This is Altman's comeback movie after being gone for, I think, over 10 years, not making anything for over 10 years, and kind of being shut out and blackballed by the studio system. And he basically, the first movie he gets made after he comes back is just a gigantic feud to Hollywood producers.
Right.
It's the whole movie is about how the movies that people are making now suck and how movies that he made were good. Basically, is what this movie
And
is
Scott relates.
I can't imagine why Scott loves this movie.
and I found the movie to be just delightful in that way, because as we go down the Marvel road of like the Marvel and IP road, like there's so much. This movie was made in, I think, 94 or 95, and there's so much in this movie that's just like it sees this coming. I mean, the opening shot is an 8-minute oneer, which is just like what a flex. Like it's just such a flex, and it's a flex where he acknowledges it multiple times. There's characters that talk about famous oneers during the oneer, which is just ridiculous. And I think the only reason he did it is to be like, yeah, oneers. I think he's doing this long oneer to be like, yeah, it's not that impressive. You know, like why is everyone so impressed by oneers? Like, look at this 8-minute oneer I did.
Yet it is impressive.
It's incredibly impressive.
Right.
And then, you know, the opening shot is just the Griffin Mill, played by Tim Robbins, taking all these different meetings about people pitching him movies, and they're all just remakes or sequels, is the whole thing. And then the whole movie is about him talking about how movies make money. It's sex, it's violence, it's all this stuff that sells. And then the movie takes a turn, and you know, you realize that he's living all of these things. It's very similar to Adaptation in that way, where all the things they talk about being stupid in movies end up being exactly the plot of the second half of the movie. Right. It is very meta, and it's a commentary on the current state of movies. I think the reason that I found it I was just delighted watching it the first time, because I was like, oh, this is how I feel about movies now. Like movies are just being turned into IP factories, and nothing gets made that's original. At least nothing big gets made that's original, or very rarely. And all that people want to see is rehashes of old ideas. And it's just delightful to have one of the all-time great filmmakers be like, this sucks. It's stupid. Like, you guys are all stupid. This sucks. And basically that's the whole movie.
Well, it's funny is that you keep referring to Adaptation, right? And Spike Jonze, and but like when I watched The Player like a year ago or whatever it was, when I watched The Player, and pretty much anytime I watch an Altman film, all I can think just watching the way it's shot is how much P.T. Anderson takes from Altman.
Oh yeah.
Right. And of course, yes, they famously worked together at some point, and I don't mean steals from him, but that's just a direct, okay, I'm going to make, it's, it's like Phantom Thread is PTA's Gosford Park, and The Player, you can see it in Magnolia, you can see it in other works of PTA, anyways, just to see that generational connection is pretty cool, and it makes me appreciate it. But The Player is a very good movie. I just don't love it as much as you, but
Yeah, I mean, it's extremely reference heavy. My girlfriend said at the end, she's like, I felt like we were watching a 2-hour inside joke.
Yeah, right.
That I didn't understand. And so I get why people maybe not instantly fall in love with this movie. But there is a story that's not just meta, where Tim Robbins is great. I think this is one of my favorite Whoopi Goldberg performances.
Yes.
She's so funny. Lyle Lovett is in it briefly, and he's extremely funny. And I just think it's a really, especially if you love movies and you're into how movies are made, then this movie is it's just brilliant. It's just really fun to watch for me.
Awesome. All right.
Awesome.
Are we at number 4 now, Jason?
We are at number 4. Kliner, what do you got for us?
Okay, here's what we're going to do, guys. I'm going to give you my number 4, and then we're going to take a break, hear from some sponsors, and then come back from a short break and finish up our top 4. But I think it's too much. I need to share with you my number 4. So I need to preface it because earlier this year, the 4 of us were together on Zoom, and we were recording our best of 2020 video. And I may have been Tripp. I don't remember exactly who said this, but someone made the observation about me and my taste that, Kliner likes documentaries that feel like films, but not films that feel like documentaries. And let me tell you when that this observation was only confirmed, and I'm happy to celebrate it after recently watching and rewatching my number 4 film, which is the Iranian masterpiece that is Abbas Kiarostami's Close Up.
Oh, hell yeah.
We're going to talk about Kiarostami's Close Up in a little while after our short break, but it is a masterpiece. It's my number 4, and there's a lot of reasons I owe Scott for discovering this work, and why it means so much to me in such a short amount of time, because I only watched it in the last week twice.
That's crazy. I did not think you would like that movie at all. No, I did really.
I almost had a heart attack when I saw Kleiner's list. It was like first cow last year. I was like, whoa.
It was a very first cow emotional trip for me.
Yeah.
It very much so reminiscent of that emotional ride and experience. And Scott's, ironically, my brother-in-law, Josh Prue, shout out to Josh, because you guys are big fans of Josh's movie ratings on Letterboxd. Shout out to Josh. Josh was probably the first one to tell me a couple years back, to tell me to watch Close Up. And then Scott, was just badgering us, saying we've got to watch, and so I made it a priority because I love you guys, and it blew me away. So
awesome. I can't wait to talk about it more.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. So,
and now a word from our sponsors.
You're watching this on TrippAdvisor on YouTube. Be sure to check out some of the awesome videos. Or, if you're into Jesus and God and stuff, go on over to the Jason Tripp YouTube channel. Also available at Pastor Adam FMCIC YouTube channel. Lots of cool Jesus stuff there.
All right, welcome back after that brief word from our sponsors. We really needed to take a bit of a break there. I thought Scott was going into cardiac arrest there after that big reveal, that surprise announcement from Kliner. Close up number 4. We didn't even know if Kliner had seen any international films, let alone have any in his top 10. So
I never knew what those little words on the screen were before. It was really kind of cool. Like,
so Scott had to run, actually change his outfit. He was just sweating profusely, I think, there, and so much joy and ecstasy. But we're back, and picking up where we left off. We're into the top 4 now. And so these are, I mean, we've used the word masterpiece over and over and over again, but these really are, when we get up to our top 3 of the decade, the 90s. And just something about the 90s decade that I didn't mention earlier. I was just scanning Internet Movie Database, IMDb, and I was looking at the top 25.
Who calls it that?
I think 12 out of the top 25 are in the 90s. So this might be the best this is arguably might be the best decade ever for movies. You can argue for and against that, but there's no disputing, for the masses, there's a lot of love for this decade. And certainly
or people from our generation made the website. Either way.
Yeah, that certainly helps, right? Yeah. All right, number 4. Now for something a little different. We're going to kind of change things up a little bit. This is not only a great movie, but it's my favorite animated movie. And I thought we'd throw an animated film into the mix. Kliner mentioned his favorite documentary of all time, Hoop Dreams. Seems like months ago. You mentioned that a couple hours ago. My favorite animated film, you could arguably pick a number of animated films from this director, the great Brad Bird. Done some fantastic work with Pixar, Ratatouille, both Incredibles movies. But he showed his diversity as a director. He directed one of the Mission Impossible movies as well. But my all-time beloved favorite animated film, one that I revisit every summer with my family and friends, is The Iron Giant from 1999. This is just a beautiful, whimsical film. It just whisks you away to another world. I mean, it's 1999, but it's set in a Cold War setting. And the way it's animated, the 2D animation, you actually feel like you're in that particular era and time period. I forget it's an animated film sometimes when I'm watching. You're just so immersed in the story and these characters. I'm sure many have seen it or heard of it. If you haven't, basically it is about a mysterious iron giant that appears in Cold War America. When tensions are hot between America and Russia, when are tensions not hot between America and Russia, it seems. And this giant shows up and befriends this young boy who kind of hides and houses the giant. Meanwhile, the military gets word and wind of this giant robot. Of course, they assume it's from the enemy, it's nefarious, and so they're trying to seek it out. Meanwhile, it's a friendship story, an unlikely friendship story. And I love stories that are unlikely friendship stories. I got another one coming up on my list soon. But between this Iron Giant, some of the best acting from Vin Diesel ever, the voice of Iron Giant. It tells everyone how I feel about him as an actor. But you see this beautiful friendship that forms between Hogarth, this child, and this Iron Giant, and really the meta narrative. It's really this tension, and I think this is the meta narrative of meta narratives in life. It's been true in my life, in my sort of vocational life in the world. Is this struggle between control and power motivated by fear, which is personified by the military and Kent Mansley, voiced by Christopher McDonald in this film, and versus sort of forgiveness and self-sacrificial love. And you see this tension back and forth in the friendship and within the identity and the persona of the Iron Giant. And there are times where he's sort of programmed to fight violence with violence, to respond to terror and violence with violence. And then, in his sort of friendship throughout the film with this young boy, he learns, violence is not the way to solve violence and overcome violence. And it's all hurling towards a harrowing conclusion and a moment of tenderness and self-sacrificial love displayed in this film. And so this is a film that it keeps growing on me. The first time I watched it, I was whisked away. Experience and enjoy it with my family and my kids, and this is around the campfire at camp every summer. This is on our short list, so it's near and dear to my heart. I did want to throw out an animated film. It's number 4, which might seem a little high to you guys, but there's no denying this is a beloved film for me and my favorite animated film. And that's my favorite animated film. It's just a great film. So
I think you can argue that it's one of the 3 best animated movies ever.
Yeah,
So,
Absolutely.
it's certainly worthy of the list.
cool. Well, thanks, Scott.
Yeah.
Nice to get some love from you.
Yeah.
He doesn't shell it out easily. So you
No.
All right. It is
Okay,
time.
go ahead.
Furman?
What's that? Yeah, so okay, I'm gonna change tacks a little bit, okay? You know, it's for the top 4, the 90s were, I was 7 when the decade started and 17 when it ended. So it was kind of this formative time for me. And, you know, so it's like, what I'm going to give the people what they want, I think here. There's a little some populist picks. There's some films that hung with me when I was...
This is Nick trying to like set us up for just the absolute dog movies he's about to pick.
No, that's not true. This movie is on your list, okay?
Oh, okay.
My number 4 is Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park. So there are...
Dinosaurs, not dogs.
Yeah, exactly. There are at least 2 other great, you know, we mentioned one in one war film, in Saving Ryan's Privates, and now we left out the great comedy, Schindler's List, and so now...
16 to 20 for me. It's just so hard to rewatch, so it was hard to keep
Everything is 16 to 20 for Jason.
25, 16 to 20.
I will show you my 16 to 20. There's a few
There's
ties
30
in there,
films in there.
80 movies.
Hey, it was on my list last time we had this conversation.
Yeah, it's not on mine. It's a hard rewatch.
Yeah.
Anyway, so look, this movie, I saw it. Okay, I have a vivid memory of first seeing this. I was 10 years old. It's the only time my parents ever let me skip school to go to the movies. And I know this because my dad's a huge movie guy. I mention him often in our group. My mom is not. And so we went to see Jurassic Park in '93. And I just remember my mom standing in the back of the theater because it was so terrifying. And like, I just think it sits in this perfect time when there's like 20 special effects things in this movie. Phantom Menace in '99 has over 2,000. So like 6 years, that kind of difference. It's all the practical effects. They built a real animatronic dinosaur. They actually flipped a Jeep. They did all those things. So I just think that you watch it. I watched it like 6 months ago and it still plays, man. Like it does not play like a 20, 30-year-old film almost. And I just think it's iconic. It's an iconic, like I love Jeff Goldblum's performance in this movie. There's several scenes we can remember. The raptor scene at the end is an all-time banger. And so I just couldn't deny it. And I also think it's the proof that this dude, who I love, Steven Spielberg, is like, let me just show you I can make a summer blockbuster in 3 different decades. And Tripp would argue 4 with Minority Report. So, you know, Jaws in Indiana and now Jurassic Park. So that's my number 4.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean,
It's a solid choice.
an all-time great blockbuster. It's like the perfect. I mean, Spielberg basically created summer blockbuster movies with Jaws, and yeah, this movie is pretty close to flawless, and it's just a great rewatch. I mean, you mentioned the raptor scene, but I think like rewatching that scene, the staging, the acting, the fact that there are dinosaurs that don't look like they're from 1997 or whenever this movie came out is like, it's jaw-dropping. I don't understand how this movie has aged so well, but it still holds up. It's great.
Yeah, and you know we're all movie fans, but we're also sports fans. You could argue that there are no Toronto Raptors basketball team without this movie.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, because they get that team like a couple years after this releases, right? So
I wish there was no Toronto Raptors basketball team, to be honest.
Bitter Sixers fan.
Even as a kid, I was like, the Toronto what? Why are we doing that? Anaheim Mighty Ducks and Toronto Raptors? What the?
That's the power of Spielberg, man.
Yeah.
Cuts across culture for sure. No, it's a great film. And if we ever do an 80s list or 70s list, I will be hard on the Steven Spielberg bandwagon because some of his favorites are in the 70s and 80s for me. Yeah.
16 to 20, lots of Spielberg. Yeah, gotcha.
Just one. Moving on.
God's up.
Rescue this, Scotty.
All right, so my number 4, we've mentioned the Coens, I think, 3 times now?
Yeah.
My number 4 is maybe the most important film in my life. Definitely the film I've watched the most times in my life, and that is The Big Lebowski. The Big Lebowski, maybe not the Coens' best piece of art, but it is by far their most rewatchable movie. It's by far their most quotable movie. It's by far their most fun movie, and it's probably their strangest movie also. Like, nothing really happens in this movie. The motivation for the characters is very unclear, other than the Big Lebowski, or Jeffrey Lebowski, not wanting to do anything, basically just like wanting to like chill out, not have a job, bowl, and
Robe, White Russians.
yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of like meaning that people have placed onto this film in later years, and the Coens have basically been like, no, like that's not, no, like this movie is not really about anything other than just this absurd storyline. And I mentioned it before with Fargo, but they just have this way of creating characters unlike any storytellers of the last 35 years. I just can't. There are so many iconic characters in this movie. Obviously, the dude is iconic, and it basically changes Jeff Daniels' career. Jeff Bridges. Excuse me, Jeff Bridges.
Maybe Daniels.
Dumb and Dumber is still coming on Kliner.
Yeah. It basically changes Bridges' entire career, and the fact that he was like a handsome leading man before this movie, and then after he's the bearded, long hair dude, and that's his whole public persona now. It's very bizarre. And then the supporting performances from Buscemi, and why am I blanking on
John Goodman?
And Goodman? Yeah, I mean Goodman's. I quote Goodman's character in this movie maybe more than anything. In my
out of your element.
Yeah, you're out of your element, or Calmer Than You Are is a big one for me. I just say that all the time. This movie is so quotable. It's so fun to watch. It's so bizarre. And it's just iconic. It's the iconic for like men our age. It's the iconic movie from that era. It was on all the time in college. It was on all the time in my mid-20s. Everyone I know loves this movie and quotes this movie. And it's just, I think it's probably the most ubiquitous 90s movie that we have. It's just maybe the most important in that way, just as a cultural touchstone. And I love this movie. Every time I watch it, I discover something new. I said to my girlfriend the other day, she said something about sports, and I said, obviously you are not a golfer. And it's a huge part of my life in a way that no other movie on my list is. So I love this movie. And I love the Coen brothers.
Yeah.
Is it a fair assessment? And Scott, you might agree with this. You guys might not. Is it like the movie equivalent to like what Seinfeld was to sitcoms? Like just so quotable, right? Everything circles back to something in either Seinfeld or The Big Lebowski. For me, anyway.
And we didn't even mention the fact that this is like, I didn't even mention the fact that this is like an incredibly made movie. I mean, Roger Deakins shot this movie also. Yeah. Like why? It's just it's like a stupid stoner comedy in a lot of ways, and has one of the best cinematographers ever that shot it. It's just an immaculately made film. The performances are iconic, and it's the most quotable movie of the 90s for sure.
No joke. Yesterday, I was listening. I think I shared this with you guys, but I was listening to a podcast of Roger Deakins, the cinematographer, talking with John Turturro, who plays a small part in Big Lebowski as the Jesus, but he's in lots of Coen Brothers films. They're talking about all of it, but when they got to the Big Lebowski, both of them said, when Joel and Ethan gave us the script, I didn't know what it was about. I didn't get it, but of course I'm going to do it, but I don't understand it. and Ethan Turturro said it took him years. Like it took him years to actually appreciate it and understand what the whole thing is, and it's cool.
Well, obviously he didn't appreciate it enough to leave it alone because they made a pretty bad spin-off.
I haven't seen that.
Don't waste your time.
Yeah.
No, that's good. It's got to be up there for sure. Yeah.
Okay. All right, top three for me. Well, we have spoken quite a bit about Scorsese, and I adore Scorsese. And my favorite film of his from the '90s, one of my favorite films of his of all time, is ready for it, Scott? Is Bringing Out the Dead. Bringing Out the Dead.
Oh, Nick Cage! Surprise!
is Scorsese's masterpiece, his best film from the '90s. Top 5 films of all time for him. It's now here's the reality of it. Something that he admits to. He and screenwriter Paul Schrader. So this is a Scorsese and Schrader film, but they both admit that this is this is from the words of Roger Ebert. This is a spiritual sequel to Taxi Driver, 1976, which I mean, for many, and myself included, Taxi Driver is the best work, the greatest masterpiece of Scorsese. But Bringing Out Your Dead is very much a spiritual sequel to that. But this time, instead of a psychotic cabbie roaming the streets of New York, the story follows a paramedic played by Nicolas Cage who can't sleep and is slowly losing his mind. And on the one hand, Bringing Out Your Dead is a black comedy ghost story of sorts. And of course, Cage is perfectly cast as he descends into madness. But on the other hand, this is a film that builds upon all of that religious symbolism from Taxi Driver and allows Scorsese and Schrader to both, once again, use New York City as a purgatory of sorts narratively. And this is a film that has a 3-day structure and is about death and resurrection, but it's also this journey into the protagonist's Garden of Gethsemane, of his own suffering. And I'll talk about this film actually briefly again when I come to my number 2. But either way, Bringing Out Your Dead is dark, it's intense, it's one I've never been able to forget, and I'm washed away by its incredible artistry and masterpiece that it is every time I watch it again. And I'm just so grateful that all of you guys agree with me. So thank you for that. Yeah, that's my number 3.
I can honestly say I've never seen this movie. It has to be.
That's funny you mention that.
It is.
It has to be probably the least discussed Scorsese movie. Like maybe of all of his movies. Like you barely hear people talk about this movie.
Well, maybe that's why when I got the list from all of you, I'm looking at them like I've seen every movie on all of our lists except for one, and it was Bring Out the Dead. So last night, I'm like, I want to try and save face, so I queued this up and I watched it, and it's mid-tier Scorsese for me. But even mid-tier Scorsese is wonderful. I enjoyed it. I wouldn't push it into my top 5, but it's very good. And I know you love Cage, Kliner, but for me, it's his performance is solid, but it's some of the supporting roles like Ving Rhames. We're going to give him his platform here for the next few minutes. He's phenomenal. Tom Sizemore, kind of playing going off the rails dispatch partner, not dispatch partner. I'm listening to the movie. I'm like, first dispatch call comes in. I didn't know it. Like, holy crap, that's Scorsese himself. He's the dispatcher, his voice. So like, that's cool. So yeah, no, it was. It's an interesting film. You know, any Schrader Scorsese collaboration is worth watching.
And honestly, like Scott, I appreciate Jason doing this. And hey, you didn't watch it and take the time for it. That's cool. But
I didn't know it was on your list.
You didn't know it was coming up. I know. But honestly, like Roger Ebert, what he has to say about it, and in the year that it came out, and what that meant, and of course, as you know. I mean, Scorsese and Roger Ebert were friends, and he wrote a book based on their conversations, which is a fantastic read. But like, it was very much a pinnacle of a legacy film, like tied to everything he had done before it. And Roger was able to point that out in his reviews and articles about it, and his conversations with him about it. Which to me only just, again, heightens what, as a young teenager watching this thing, it tore my mind apart. Because I don't know. Actually, I don't know. I don't know what Scorsese films I would have seen at that age before that film, right? And so that was definitely one of the films, if not the film, that implanted Scorsese in my head. That in 1999, as a high schooler, walking through Blockbuster, seeing Nick Cage on the VHS copy of some Martin Scorsese film. I mean, maybe I saw one of his movies beforehand, but that implanted him in my mind, right? So very formative for me, and again, it stands up. I love it.
And that's what's interesting about this decade, right? Some of these movies are sort of on ramps to these directors, right? So they hold special places in our heart for you. That's Bring Out the Dead. For me, being married to a woman who loves Victorian age period pieces, like Age of Innocence has really grown on me in the 90s from him, which is kind of a unique offering from Scorsese, but he's a master. He's got great films throughout multiple decades, and we'll be talking about him again and again and again.
Yep.
All right. This is an interesting segue to my number 3. It's kind of neat how some of these segues are seamless today. So when I think of Scorsese, one thing I think about is he, better than anyone, captures the vibe and the life and the pace and the nightlife of New York City.
Mm-hmm.
There's another director who does similar things in Los Angeles. And so it's time to talk about the great Michael Mann's masterpiece from the 90s, not The Insider. We're going to talk about Heat, because what Scorsese does with New York City, Michael Mann does in LA, coast to coast. So, I mean, with Collateral, with multiple films, it's fantastic. So my number 3 is the great Michael Mann, one of my favorite directors, his 90s masterpiece. Because for me, the action is the juice. Yeah, there's Tom Sizemore again, right? I'm in. I'm all in this movie. It's an epic. It's pushing close to 3-hour runtime, but there is not a wasted frame or piece of dialogue in this film. We've been singing the praises of both Robert De Niro and Al Pacino, arguably 2 of the greatest actors of the last generation. And what a treat to see them both on screen together in the same film. Who knew a line as obscure as "Why don't I buy you a cup of coffee" would lead to one of the greatest scenes in cinema, I would say, where Pacino's character, Vincent Hanna, detective, and Robert De Niro's character, the Neil McCauley, the leader of this, high-profile bank robbery group. I mean, they sit down and they have a cup of coffee. It's the greatest sort of little cat and mouse sort of crime drama action movie. There's so much here to love. I mean, the detailed storytelling, the cinematography, the cast is phenomenal top to bottom. It's not just Pacino and De Niro, as great as they are, but Val Kilmer's great in this movie. You got John Voight, Tom Sizemore, Ashley Judd, Amy Brenneman, Wes Studi. He's worked on a number of collabs with Michael Mann. I mean, top to bottom, the acting is phenomenal here. We watch a podcast. I think we mentioned it briefly. I'll mention to those watching, called the Rewatchables. And what they do weekly is they'll pick a movie that is highly rewatchable. They'll discuss it. Well, they just did an episode called 3 Heat, the 3rd time they've circled back to this film, because it is so iconic, so rewatchable. And so maybe subconsciously, that's why I put it at number 3 after watching the 3 Heat podcast. But I love this movie. Every time I go back to it, it's just so engrossing. It doesn't feel like it's like time stands still. It doesn't feel like 3 hours. It doesn't drag. The pacing is perfect. There's a good mix of action scenes and drama scenes and relationship scenes. And it really is at its core. I mean, about Pacino's character and De Niro's character, although they're on different sides of the law, there's a lot of similarities. It's about obsession. They're both obsessed with what they do. And without that obsession in their life, that's really a big part of their identity. And so you're almost rooting for both of them. You almost want them to embrace and give each other a big hug at the end of the movie. And they almost do something like that at the end of the movie. But I think most people have probably seen it. I won't spoil all the details of it if you haven't. This is undisputedly, at least in 3/4 of this group, Michael Mann's 90s masterpiece. It's Heat. Jump in, Nick and Scott. Help me out here.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. This movie just rules. It's so rare that you can just enjoy. I don't know. The movie is just, it's just a flex from everyone. It's a flex from Michael Mann. The way this film is made. I mean, the bank robbery scene in downtown LA is one of the coolest action scenes ever shot. De Niro and Pacino especially Pacino, are just going for it. And it's thrilling to watch, especially Pacino just be over the top and ridiculous. And it's a fun movie to watch. And it's really well made. So it's not often that I want to put these types of movies in my top of the decade list, but it's undeniable how important this movie is. The cast is incredible, and it's De Niro and Pacino. Maybe not at the top of their game, but it's watching them together for the first time is thrilling, and the diner scene is like an all-time great scene.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I think you guys hit it. I mean, it's 2 hours and 50 minutes and it never drags. Like it just, I can't remember a movie like that where I'm like, yeah, you should have cut this out or that out. It's basically, Michael Mann, Jason and I've done like little videos and talked about, a guy that is just like so detail oriented and so gets into characters and is so good with the crime thriller genre, just like at the top of his game. Like to me, that's he. Yeah, and you guys mentioned like the two of my favorite scenes, but the other scene is like when they go to, did you mention were you talking about the later scene, Scott, or the initial scene? You're talking about later, right? When they were
the coffee scene in the diner, right?
Yeah,
when they're together, the two of them?
and Pacino are in. I'm talking about the bank heist that's like on the streets and you can hear the guns echoing through the, it's
So, I mean, like the initial sequence, what they do with the truck, like, it's totally what Nolan does in The Dark Knight. I mean, let's just be honest. And then, the way he shot that scene that you were talking about is unreal, man. Cause they shot it with like, it wasn't live rounds, but it's just so open, man. It pops the way he shoots stuff, even in some of his lesser stuff, like when he redid Miami Vice, like the way he shoots gunfights is just so realistic. And dude, it's awesome. If you had asked me when I was a kid, I would have had a different Mann movie from the 90s, but because of a certain Madeline Stowe crush. But I think he is awesome. I mean, Insider's a great flick, but I love Heat.
Yeah, Insider's great. I agree, but this is the one for me from the 90s.
Nice thing about Insiders, Pacino plays like a relatable human being, but
that's the beauty of this performance is that it's,
I know.
At times is just absurd.
Yeah,
I mean, because she's got a great ass is one of the like most ridiculous line readings.
And you got your head all the way up it.
Absurd.
Give me everything you got.
Yeah, it's just so fun. It's so fun and an undeniably like ridiculous performance from Pacino, but still like one of the few actors that can go that hard and still be great.
Yeah.
When I rewatch, I'll just say this: when I rewatched it last year, whenever it was, someone mentioned The Dark Knight and like Christopher Nolan, it actually lessened The Dark Knight. I was like, oh, he just stole stole entire sequences like from him and recreated them, and they're better in Heat, I guess. But can I just clarify? Like, so this is Tripp's number 3, and where do you guys have it ranked? 5.
I had it 12, I think.
Okay,
these are my honorable.
Cool.
I think, I think the note on Pacino's performance is that he was supposed to act like a coked out guy without the coke, right? I mean, so I think, it's there. And Jason mentioned it briefly, but the final thing I would say is like, this movie doesn't work nearly as well as it does if you don't have buy-in on criminals. Like if you don't actually kind of get to the denouement and want both of them to somehow make it, which is like an impossibility. I think if that's not there, the film, it's not a 5-star film. It just can't be.
You're invested in the characters. And it's Mann sometimes gets accused of he's so clinical and it's
right.
It's style over substance, but there's a lot of substance in this movie. Like, there's a lot of character development. You're getting to know not only the key characters, but the side characters. Like Val Kilmer's character, you kind of ride with him.
Yeah.
Tom Side, like that quote I mentioned, the action is the juice, right? Like he's just obviously a recovering junkie, and this is now his addiction, right? Mann has said in this podcast we all listen to, like they're actually releasing a book which kind of gives a prequel and a sequel to this movie, which I'm really fascinated to read. Like, because when he prepared this movie, he had whole backstories for the characters. When he doesn't just give them the script, it's like, here's your persona, here's who you are, here's your backstory. Bear that in mind as we're filming this, so which is phenomenal. I mean, they spent how many hours on the gun range, right? I mean, preparing for this. We
do agree that the whole like Natalie Portman storyline is a mess and like really pulls it down, does it not?
Yes.
Okay.
It's very strange. It's a very strange inclusion in the movie.
Like if they just cut those scenes out, like I just feel like it would be seamless, right? Like it's just weird.
Yeah. That's why it's my number 3. It's also my 16 to 20.
Nice.
I had my issue with the movie. I think I mentioned this when we talked about it when I first watched it recently, and I was like, the Brenneman and De Niro stuff just does not work for me at all. And it's like Brenneman. I mean, Brenneman's fine in this movie, but like De Niro is one of the all-time great actors that we've had, and Brenneman is like, what was she, like a judge on a CBS drama? You know, like it's just they're in different ballparks. You know, so
Yeah.
But maybe that's the point, right? They're kind of in different ballparks on screen too, right?
I mean, that's man's great weakness, man. Like he his relationships. Like look at Watch Thief. Like the relationship in that movie is so messed up.
Yeah, you got some awkward relational stuff going on.
And she likes precious metal books or whatever, right? Isn't that what he's reading when he meets her?
she works at the bookstore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what's great? Those aren't issues in The Insider.
Yeah.
No. If you're watching Heat and you're like, you know what, I just couldn't buy that movie because of the relationships, then you're kind of missing the point of
right, exactly.
Not what the movie
I can't relate to criminals and the relationships weren't realistic. Yeah, that doesn't sound like a valid criticism. Like
whatever.
All right, let's move on.
All right, moving on. Heat is a masterpiece. We've established that. Let's move on.
Where we at? Oh, is it my turn?
Yeah.
What are we on? Three?
Number three.
Okay, well, this one's coming back again. Coming back around. Number 3 for me is The Matrix.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That's all you got to say. All right, cool.
Well, I'm trying to keep the boat moving, man.
All right, thank you. All right, that's good.
It's coming back around.
Number 3 is not coming back around, and you should all feel ashamed and guilty, and you should all turn in your film nerd membership cards, because my number 3 is one of the best movies made by one of the best directors of this era and of the current era. It's Paul Thomas Anderson's Boogie Nights. Honestly, this movie could be number 1 for me. I just recently rewatched it, and it had always been like mid-tier Paul Thomas Anderson for me. There Will Be Blood being, I think, one of the best films ever made, and I think still Paul Thomas Anderson's best movie. But what he does in Boogie Nights, I mean, it's incredible and virtual. So I can't say that word right now. It's incredible, it's incredibly well made, and it's a direct homage to Goodfellas in a lot of ways. I think that's what holds it back for some people, is that they will look at it and say, well, this is just a remake of Goodfellas, but with the porn business. And in many ways, that is a valid criticism. But this movie has, for me, something that Goodfellas doesn't, and there is a beating heart at the center of this movie. It's really, really emotionally moving in a way that I didn't remember the first time I watched it. Watching Dirk Diggler, watching his life kind of fall apart, and then watching the life fall apart of several characters as they go on, it's heartbreaking, and it's only made possible by just an incredible ensemble cast. I mean, one of the best ensembles I think ever. Certainly the best. There's another movie coming up that might have an argument, but maybe the best ensemble of the 90s. You know, I mean, Wahlberg has never been better, like not even close to as good in any other movie. And, you know, John C. Reilly is hysterically funny for me. You know, Burt Reynolds won Best Supporting Actor for this movie. He was nominated for sure. I can't remember who won.
Wow.
It's an incredible, I mean, it really is. It owes a lot to Goodfellas. I mean, the opening shot of this movie is a super long tracking shot into the club, which is just a huge flex from Paul Thomas Anderson. And then you just go on this ride, hanging out with these people. It's really fun to hang out with these people. It's very, very funny and uncomfortable at times for the first half of the movie. The scene where Dirk Diggler introduces everyone to his apartment, basically. He's like walking around and showing off his apartment, mispronouncing words as he does it. And it's so cheesy, and but then when he finally has his like, his meltdown, everything goes downhill for him. It really is heartbreaking stuff. His argument with his mom at one point, the scene with the guy that he starts doing tricks, and he has the guy in his car, and the guy, beats him up, and at the same time, what's her face that plays Roller Girl? I can't remember her name.
Heather Graham.
Heather Graham. Yeah. She's going through this thing where she runs into someone from high school, and she's going to have sex with him, like as an amateur, just like they're going to film her having sex, and then the guy recognizes her, and it breaks your heart. And then the finale of this movie is thrilling. The scene with the scene in the apartment where they're buying the drugs, or they think they're selling drugs. It's what's his face that's so good in that scene. Alfred Molina, who's so good in that scene. It's so that he ratchets attention in a way in that scene that is just like, it's amazingly entertaining, that scene, but it's also just like, what is going to happen in the scene? You got the guy like setting off firecrackers in the apartment as this is going on. It's a brilliantly made movie. I think it's Paul Thomas Anderson's best made thing. I think it's just it's a virtuoso performance from Paul Thomas Anderson, and
he's in his 20s when he's making this.
It's wild.
It's insane.
I just think like this movie, of all the Paul Thomas Anderson movies, has maybe the most heart. It just really has a lot more heart than I remembered the first time I watched it. And it's just fun to watch too. So it's my number 3 movie. Could be number 1, honestly.
So the final shot of this, Scott, is it like your top 5 or top 10 final shot?
Yeah.
Needless to say, this film has grown on you.
Yeah. All right. This is a very immature. This is a very important film.
I know.
Very immature.
You know
what? Like everyone else's list, and then all you want to do is make dick jokes. Immature.
Hey, I've already respected the.
Yeah, exactly.
I was singing praises for Magnolia earlier.
You know what? When you were talking, it actually made me think about why maybe I struggle with it, because the come down is really hard in that one. For some reason the come down hits me harder in that. Hit me harder than even in Goodfellas. I don't know why, but yeah.
Well, I will say that like compared to Goodfellas, Boogie Nights is far more human. Like in terms of the come down, the emotional come down, like you can relate far more to these human beings in Boogie Nights than you can in Goodfellas. I struggle to have sympathy, right, for the people in Goodfellas, but
I think there's something at the center of this movie that's like everyone in this movie has this imposter syndrome, where everyone not imposter syndrome so much, but everyone thinks they're something that they're actually not, and they think they're this important. They think, Dirk Diggler thinks he's like a movie star. Burt Reynolds thinks that he's like a great director, and it's relatable in a way. I mean, even though it's the porn business, it's relatable in a way where there's times in your life where you think that you're one thing, and then it turns out that you're not that thing. And then it becomes, when they have this realization that like, oh, I'm actually in a horrible business that is horrible to people, right, that this is destroying my life. When they have that realization, it's heartbreaking. And I think that's the thing for me that elevates it over Goodfellas, is that you can relate to these people, and it's beautifully done in a way that I did not remember it being. I really remember this being like a porno hangout movie from when I saw it originally. And it's not that. It's much. There's much more there than I remember.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, for me, I appreciate the humanness of it. I'm just going back to my, just if I'm vulnerable, like I was working through my own porn addiction at this time when this movie came out, so that's why it's both resonates and it's kind of painful to revisit that, because I was kind of at a self-destructive time in my life too. So yeah, but PTA, I mean, he's phenomenal. I mean, we'll be singing his praises in multiple decades to come for sure. And I'll say it again, Licorice Pizza coming soon. Don't miss that one.
Cannot wait.
Phenomenal.
Cannot wait.
Yeah.
Is that, Scott, is that like a pretty unique take on Boogie Nights, you think? The heart and human side, or is that something?
I don't know, honestly. Like I haven't listened to any like deep dive podcasts on it. I think the comparison to Goodfellas is so prevalent. Like Everyone talks about it, and it's for good reason. Like, it's a direct homage to Goodfellas.
Yeah, right.
Like, it's not. So, so I think there's a lot of people that don't view it in that way. I just, man, I was really.
I just think, though. I mean, I like the stylistically. Of course, that's the conversation about the comparison to Goodfellas. But I honestly like, and I haven't seen the film in years and years and years. But I just remember the scenes with Don Cheadle, and like, there's nowhere in Goodfellas is there a scene and dialogue like that, like what he has to carry. So like, that's where, like, I understand the comparison stylistically to Goodfellas, but the story is something entirely different. But
there's much more. And Paul Thomas Anderson does the same thing in Magnolia, where it's just like this amazing merging of several like an incredible amount of stories, like organizing that kind of the stories and making them all come together in a interesting and cohesive way is very difficult to do. And he manages to do it at the end of that movie, where you see all of the people going through this stuff and they all pass each other, like they all are right there in each other's lives. It's an incredible movie, and it's so much better than I remembered it being the first time I saw it. So yeah, Boogie Nights.
Okay.
Cool.
Now I got to go back.
Yeah, you really do, man. I really think you need to rewatch it, and I would love to hear what you think about it now.
That would be after I put the wife and kids to bed one night.
Yeah.
Are we at number 2 now?
Number 2, back to you, Kliner.
Okay, yeah, number 2. Well, speaking of grown up, R-rated, not for everybody kind of films, my number 2 is closely related, for me at least, closely related to my number 3. My number 3 was Bringing Out the Dead by Scorsese. But my number 2 is David Fincher's masterpiece Fight Club. And I share them so closely because, again, going back to Raj, to the guy who influenced me more than anyone else, Roger Ebert did not like Fight Club, and he thought that Bringing Out the Dead, which came out the same year but several months after it, he believed that it was the solution to the problem that Fight Club raises, which I think is a very valid and fascinating argument. But of course, I disagree with Roger in terms of his opinion about Fight Club, because I do think it still stands as a masterpiece. David Fincher is my favorite living filmmaker, and this is a film that captured the imagination of a generation. And 20 years later, it's still a film that for many of us unravels as a dark and disturbing parable in which consumeristic corruption meets existential crisis. I mean, that's the film in a nutshell. And like many films of the late 90s, these were themes, common themes explored by the Gen X storytellers that were finally finding themselves funded to make films. And Fight Club remains one of the greatest expressions of these themes by the greatest filmmaker of his generation. And I'll just say that I think the last time I watched Fight Club, I was reading, speaking of favorite filmmakers, of Sidney Lumet, my other favorite filmmaker, but he wrote a book called Making Movies, and I was reading that book when I last watched this. And in the book, he talks about how filmmaking follows, in filmmaking, form follows function, and that what a movie is about dictates how the story's told. And in the case of Fight Club, David Fincher's exaggerated and excessive visual style finds its greatest fulfillment in a story about a fractured psyche, seeking to rebel against a fractured society. And so as a result, this is a film of excessiveness, a film of indulgence. It's also important to note that this is a film that's a pre-9/11 meditation. That actually kind of sets the stage appropriately. But ultimately, Fight Club remains for me a masterful work of endless exploration. And so it's my number 2.
It's interesting. It's an interesting choice. This is a movie that, like, when I was 20, was very important to me. I also read the book. I've read a few. When I was younger, I didn't read a lot of fiction, but Chuck Palahniuk was one that I read a lot of as a young person. And it was a really important movie to me in my 20s. I think this movie has aged really badly. I think the worldview that this movie has is really like toxic and just, I don't know, man. I don't like the way the messaging in this movie comes across now. So I don't know if that's something for me to kind of unpack myself, I guess. I don't think it lessens Fincher.
Well, you're not wrong, but I know Fincher's response would be that it's a satire and a comedy first and foremost.
Right.
A satire and a comedy is the first genre he would place it in, and therefore that addresses, you know, the things that you're rightfully to observe, right? But
I think the messaging. I think this movie is about as subtle as a sledgehammer. And if you've ever read Chuck Palahniuk, that's kind of his writing style too. It's not subtle. It's not. So I think this movie is just, the impact of this movie has lessened for me over the years. But like it was for sure. One, it was my introduction to Fincher, and then two, it was maybe one of the top 5 most important movies to me in college. So you said white men everywhere.
Yeah, that's interesting because I would say the same, exactly what you said. Same. This was on my short list of, you know, we're popping this in after the bar on a Friday night or whatever. But I'm with Roger on this one. Yeah, I was going to bring a sign. I'm with Roger. I forgot. So, but I'm in the minority with Roger. Yeah, not bad company in the minority. But it is an important movie, and it deserves mentioning certainly because it would be on many other people's lists, I'm sure.
Well,
I'll take 7 any day of the week though.
It's on a lot of Proud Boys lists. Probably on a lot of.
Oh man! Oh gosh! Come on! Don't bring that into
QAnon,
this.
Proud Boys.
Don't bring that into this. Good grief!
Yeah, I had this. This is one of the ones like when I talked at the very beginning of our video about cutting it. You know, this was the one I cut that, you know, that I thought you would have, but I don't like. Okay, we could do the toxic masculinity thing, but I think you also the stylistic stuff he's doing in this film is amazing. It's one of the greatest reveals ever.
Yeah.
Brad Pitt's performance is on fire.
Norton rules too.
You could argue Norton is just toe to toe with him. And and you know, I read the book too, actually. And I actually remember, dude, when you were reading a ton of Palahniuk stuff like Choke and all those other books. I read it, and the movie, he's not taking many liberties with Palahniuk's book. Like it's pretty much what's on screen. So, and some of the stuff he says, you know, about being a generation of blah blah blah, and we're pissed off, and some of the quotes, it's like through a certain lens are problematic, but I think through other lenses are kind of prescient. So, I'm with you, Kliner. I will defend Fight Club vis-a-vis 7, but I also understand that, you know, I think most of us probably think he's made he's made a lot of awesome stuff since, right? So yeah.
Cool.
I will revisit Mank before I revisit Fight Club. Let's just put it that way. And I'm not the biggest Mank fan by any stretch. I have zero desire to rewatch this. I don't know why, but it was there when I was in my 20s, and
I think oftentimes, and this is getting into a very big topic, but I think oftentimes fandom for movies affects how I feel about movies, especially now. So like I look at the people that are obsessed with this movie and I'm like, I don't have anything in common with these people. I don't have any desire to like revisit this. I don't think this movie is cool. You know, like I find it a very difficult rewatch, and I think it's my least favorite David Fincher movie. But it was very important to me at one point. So, yeah.
Wow. Cool. Okay.
But I love you.
You'll have something in common with Kliner very soon.
Okay. I think I'm next. Am I next? You next? You next?
Wait. Trip? Yeah. Trip
next.
Okay, because I share mine with Scott, I think.
Yeah.
Well, here's a movie that has aged well. I think it's aged very well. It was very prescient. My top 2 movies are both essentially prison movies. The genre and tone is quite different, but at their core, they're prison movies. But yeah, this one's unique to my list. I think you guys may like this movie. You're probably baffled why it's on a top 10 list, but it's The Truman Show. The Truman Show continues to be a movie that has multiple layers that can be explored and discussed. Much like Groundhog Day, it's on its surface, it's very light, it's comical, it's a good popcorn flick, it's a good family flick, but below the surface, there's a lot to explore. And as I age, as I get into my 40s, these are the movies that resonate with me more so than previously mentioned movies like Fight Club. They have a wide appeal to a lot of people. I mean, it's Jim Carrey, one of his best performances. Hey, I gotta defend Jim Carrey, good Canadian guy. Ed Harris, he had quite the run in the 90s as well. Plays Christoph. I mean, I'm sure everybody has heard or seen this movie, but this is pre everything that we're seeing in our world today. This is pre like internet and social media and all the reality TV shows, but it's very much forward thinking in that it's basically Jim Carrey's whole life under a microscope, under a camera. Everyone else is consuming and enjoying at his expense, and he, unbeknownst to him, and as he grows throughout the movie, he starts getting hints and clues, sort of breadcrumbs that something is amiss, something's not right in his world. And so he goes in this period of great disillusionment, disorientation, frustration, and anger, and basically he's waking up to a new reality he's trying to break free from. It really is a prison story. I mean, he's caught in a world where he thinks he's free, but he's not, and it's all fabricated, it's all foreign. That's a meta narrative that speaks a lot to our generation today. The iconic line that I really take away from this film is from Ed Harris, Christoph. Interesting name, Christoph. He's the one sitting high above this, literally a bubble, and he's interviewed, and I guess the interviewer from the TV show asks him, well, how do people go along with this? How does he never assume or guess? And he says, we accept the reality of the world which we're presented. Excuse me. It's as simple as that, and that's a statement that goes far beyond this movie. That touches a lot of things, and for me, not simply as a movie lover, but vocationally as a minister, I walk along a lot of people who've accepted certain toxic realities, religious realities maybe, or experiences that are given, and they're sort of waking up and breaking free from that. And so it hits me on that level because it intersects with my life and my vocation. Peter Weir, hit and miss as a director for me, but I think this is his best work. Laura Linney's phenomenal as the sort of the fake wife of Jim Carrey in this film. It's prescient, it's parabolic, it's fun on the surface with a richness buried deep beneath it, and I keep revisiting it. My kids love it as well, which means a lot to me. It's led to some really good discussions with a lot of people outside of viewing experience, so it's held the test of times. I think it's aged well, and it's my number 2.
It's almost like Peter Weir knew that the next decade would feature millions of people watching real people in reality TV doing things. Like, man, you could argue it's one of the most prescient films of all time in that way.
It really is. I think it is a really nice movie, and it has a lot to say to us now, which is great. I think it makes a lot of sense that Tripp appreciates it as someone with kids too, because this is the kind of movie that you can give to a kid, and it's deep without being complicated or like overly subtle. So I think it's like a really nice piece of movie making. I just think it's like a really great movie for everyone to watch. So I like this movie a lot.
Scott thinks it's nice, and
it's nice. It's nice.
And I appreciate that Tripp's bringing the heavy dad energy. That's what I appreciate most.
I got the best of both here. I mean, I've got the 4-hour Asian art house film, and I've got Truman Show. So we got the whole spectrum covered here.
He's not done with the dad takes either. There's another dad take coming.
It might be. Spoiler alert right here over my shoulders.
When we go back 80s and 70s, I'm gonna have something else to say about the Peter Weir stuff, though. I mean, he made some pretty awesome stuff in the.
Yeah, he did, but I think this is Apex Mountain for him.
For Society, or he's hit and miss, I guess.
Yeah,
dude, it's time, Scott.
Yes,
number 2.
You guys can tag team this one.
Yeah,
I'm letting you lead off because this is
clueless.
Your baby.
What? Okay, I'm excited now. Number 2.
Wait, let's see if Kliner can guess. What is it?
Oh, so this is something Nick already mentioned?
No, they're both mentioning it in tandem together at 2.
Oh.
Who are the most important directors of the 90s? It's Paul Thomas Anderson, the Coen brothers, and who? All right, it's Quentin Tarantino.
Quentin Tarantino. Oh,
Yeah.
see, I knew I was going to have a brain fart. Of
Movie is-
course, Paul. I'm
movie is
trying to think of
Pulp-
what hasn't been mentioned. I made fun of
Movie
this already.
Do you need a Royale with cheese or something? Come on.
Yeah.
movie is his most important movie and his best movie, and I don't think it's particularly close. The movie is Pulp Fiction. This movie, I think, and of course, like, you know, we're a bunch of 30-something-year-old white men. Of course, we love Quentin Tarantino, but I think this movie introduced me to the idea that movies could be more than just something to watch and enjoy, and not think too deeply about this. This introduced me to film as art, basically. What he accomplishes in this movie is basically impossible. It's all the different stories coming together, the timeline being what it is, the filmmaking being what it is, the performances and the ensemble being what it is. I mean, he has a way of reforming, using our ideas about actors as like a weapon in his movies. Like, Travolta was basically reborn in this movie.
Yeah.
His career was completely rejuvenated from this movie. I don't even, it's so hard to explain what the plot is in this movie because there's not really much of a plot. I mean, there is a lot of plot, but it's not necessarily a cohesive, coherent thing. And it's utterly intentional in that way. But the way that he weaves these stories in and out of each other, and, you know, creates this anthology, but also creates a overarching story, it's nothing short of, it's a miracle. I don't understand how he does what he does in this movie. And at the same time, it being, again, one of the most quotable and recognizable movies of all time. I mean, everyone knows, you see the dance scene, you instantly know what movie you're watching. You see Samuel L. Jackson's line read, you hear Samuel L. Jackson's line readings, you instantly know what movie you're watching. Tim Roth is incredible in this movie. I just love him in this movie, and Bruce Willis is great in this movie. I mean, there's nothing, this is just a perfect movie. And the way that Tarantino uses homage and uses and just cribs from other artists from the past is what made me love movies, because every time one of his movies came out, I had to know what his influences were, what he was taking from. It's what introduced me to the French New Wave. It's what introduced me to Korean movies and Japanese movies. It's just an amazing piece of art, and at the same time is one of the most utterly rewatchable movies of the last 50 years.
Yeah. So I completely agree, but I agree now. I would say my journey to it was really different, because the first time I saw it, I mean, I wouldn't say I didn't like it. I just didn't quite get it. I was like obsessed with the briefcase and like, what's the light and what's going on? You know, I didn't know what MacGuffins were. And the time, like, why is the film ending earlier in chronology than what happens later? You know, because I hadn't watched a lot of French New Wave films, and the Zed stuff and the Gimp, and like that whole scene was like, what the hell is happening? Like, this is so violent, and they're just standing around talking. Like, I didn't get the gratuitous violence and the hangout film elements and all that sort of stuff. So the first time through, I think I was kind of like, well, this is clearly impressive in like such a distinct voice, but man, I just for films, like for me, I think I've seen it 4 times, and each time I started to get more of it. And as my film library or my film bank in my head grew, I was able to connect to more elements of it. But this last time was the time when it really hit me, because for me, and Kliner and I have talked about this, like when you connect to like a theme of a film, or it becomes like a personal connection, because these guys are scoundrels. Like, why care? But I was able to discover that, like, if you look at there's like 3 main episodes, like Scott was saying, there's like weave scenes, but there's like, it's kind of episodic. Each of the scoundrels in those scenes is facing like sort of a moral test. And if you actually parse it out, you can see it. Like Vincent is the temptation of Mia's character, who, how do you resist Uma Thurman in this film? Like, I don't like, how do you do that? Come on, Jason, you got to at least acknowledge. Yeah, dude, it's insane. Yeah, and you know, all the stuff that Samuel L. is bringing in with just trying to be the shepherd, baby, you know, and all that stuff. So, and there's the whole second episode has something too, with Willis sort of doubling back against his sworn enemy. And so anyway, I've come to absolutely agree, but it took me a while to get there, I would say. And now I love Tarantino, and yeah, man, he's like a lexicon for for film in the last 30 years.
You can argue that he is the most important art film director of the last like 30 years. I mean, the fact that he's making movies that do $150 million, but he's making these original weird stories,
right?
It's just so rare now. And Pulp Fiction is the peak of his creativity. I think I heard someone say this on another podcast where it seemed like he was emptying the idea bag into this movie. He just put everything he could into this movie, like he may not get to make another movie. It really does feel like that. But the way he pays tribute to film of the past is something that I just am obsessed with now. And I know this ensemble, I know I said Boogie Nights is the best ensemble of the 90s, but man, this ensemble is so creatively chosen. The casting is so interesting. Uma Thurman and Travolta's chemistry is just like unmatched. They're so good in this movie together. And the dancing scene, even though he basically cribbed it directly from 8.5, like from Fellini, but like it's great, man. I love watching this movie. I can rewatch it anytime. It's perfect.
That's right. I have a very vivid memory because whatever was it 94 when this came out? Like too young to see it in theaters. But I have a vivid memory of a family friend.
You youngins.
of a family friend who went to see this film, Pulp Fiction. I've always remembered this because it was years later that I finally saw it, and I own it and have seen it a dozen times. But at whatever young age I was, to hear him like, yeah, I just saw some new movie called Pulp Fiction, and it didn't make any sense. I mean, Bruce Willis was alive, and then he was dead, and then later he was alive again, and I don't understand what was going on.
Right.
Like, but it was just like that's the memory that that's something that is just etched in my memory, and like that. To think about the evolution of audiences that Tarantino was guiding us through, right? Because that would not be an issue nowadays, right? Like broken up chronology in that way. Right. But at that time in '94, like a lot of people just weren't ready for it and like just didn't grasp it, right? And anyways, but it's a great film. I think my feelings, it used to be 5-star for me, and I think my feelings about it are very, very similar to Goodfellas, just in the sense of like undeniable greatness, but the bleakness of it has waned on me. And therefore, which is why I may, I rewatch a work like Jackie Brown, and I'm like, which was exactly what came after this, and I'm like, oh, this is the stronger work because of the longevity, but undeniable the influence of this film, and yeah,
that sums it up for me too. It's interesting, Scott. You were talking, you kind of said something that compares your thoughts on this movie to Magnolia. Like they're going for it. They may not be able to make another movie. They're just throwing all their ideas into it. And I guess the critique for Magnolia is kind of, if there is a critique from me for this movie, I think it's undeniably a great movie. There's so many interesting threads and callbacks to cinema from the past. But sometimes they don't all fit together for me, and they don't emotionally resonate with me. That being said, it's undeniably a great movie. I mean, you look at any top 10 list pretty much by anybody in the industry, and Pulp Fiction's on the list, as is Goodfellas. So, yeah.
I'm right, and you guys are wrong. Is basically summary. In summary.
Nick
is doing great. Good job, Nick. Bad job from Kliner and Tripp.
I'm actually having a real moment of realization right now, because 10, 15 years ago, if you'd asked me Magnolia and Pulp Fiction, I'd be like, 5 stars, those are my favorite films. And now flash forward to 38, and it's the films by both of those masters afterwards. it's Punch Drunk Love that follows Magnolia, and it's Jackie Brown that follows Pulp Fiction, that I'm like, oh, those are their greatest works. Those are the ones that have lasted for me and have unending emotional impact. Anyways, that's my own personal self-revelation of like, what does that mean and where I'm at, but that's interesting.
The real problem is that I'm dead inside. Emotional resonance does not mean nearly as much to me as it does to you guys. And we'll talk more about this. And at times I find like movies that are trying to pull on your heartstrings to be like nauseating to watch. So like I understand why a movie that we'll get to in just a moment is more important to Tripp than Pulp Fiction. I think it's incorrect, but I understand why.
Yeah, that's the top.
There's his masterpiece right
that's
here.
The top tier. I agree.
Yeah, I think that movie's. I think you could argue that's. I know you said Pulp Fiction is his best, but when you said it's like by a mile, I don't know. Inglourious is an awesome film.
I prefer Pulp Fiction, and I prefer Once Upon a Time in Hollywood over.
Oh, Once Upon a Time's up there for me too.
Inglourious Basterds would be number 3 for me.
Because to me, Once Upon a Time hits some of the others. Like it's a more personal film in some ways. Yeah. I think Jackie Brown's awesome. For the record, her relationship, Pam Grier and Robert Forster in that movie are unreal.
Forster's unbelievable.
Dude, it's unreal. Like, yeah. So I'm not at all slighting Jackie Brown. I think it's a great flick.
Can we talk about the Oscars from that year? Like, holy shit. How did Forrest Gump win 2 Oscars instead of Pulp Fiction? God, it makes me.
I gave you the answer. The truth is, I gave you the answer. Audiences weren't ready for it.
Yeah, I think so too.
They were ready for Tom. For Tom.
Of course they were ready for that. They're always ready for Forrest Gump, but they weren't ready yet for Pulp Fiction.
Well, I'm going to add another masterpiece from '94 to the mix shortly. So
I have less of a problem with that masterpiece than I do with Forrest Gump.
He called it a masterpiece. Thank you. I rest my case.
All right, who's up?
We're on 1.
Right? We're up. This is it. We've reached the top of the mountain. Number 1. Oh, man. I can't wait to hear all about Dumb and Dumber, Kliner. Wait, what's your number 1?
So you're saying there's a chance.
I don't know. I mean, I had a big brain fart. Clearly, our commercial break was too long for me because I couldn't. Does Scott know what my number 1 is?
I don't.
Okay.
I do.
No. Is it the movie that I just trashed? Oh, no.
No. I don't think.
God.
Did you just trash it?
Forrest Gump. That would
I already
mentioned
Forrest
Gump.
The nice thing is that my number 1 is Furman's number 3, and number 3, and it's a film that I got to rewatch last night, and I'm so glad I did because it's The Matrix.
Yeah, baby.
And I just want to take a moment to take in Scott's reaction to that.
I love it.
Okay, good. Okay, here's the thing. The Matrix, anyone who knows me, anyone who knew me from my younger years,
16 to 20,
could only expect this from me, and they probably would be upset at me if this wasn't the case. So The Matrix is just really something very, very meaningful and special to me. And I was obsessed with it for many, many years. I had a copy of the script that I downloaded from the internet. And we read in shop class while we were supposed to be doing shop class stuff. We made high school parodies of it and filmed our own versions of it. Like this is near and dear to my heart for many, many reasons. But here's the bottom line when it comes to The Matrix and why it deserves to be in the top 10 of the 90s, let alone for me, number 1. It's a film that redefined science fiction. It's a film that redefined the action genre, and ultimately, due to its technical and philosophical works, it redefined a lot of cinema. Can't even count the amount of times that I've watched this film, but here's the thing: that this is a film. It's so funny putting it on last night. I was like, my kids were like, "How long is this?" Like, and they'd seen it before, but like, how? And I was like, it's like 100 minutes, 2 hours. It's 2 hours and 15 minutes. It's actually way longer than you even think it is. But there's no scene wasted. Every frame in this film educates, explains, mesmerizes, and pushes the story forward. And I'll acknowledge that it could be argued that some of the characterizations are a little thin, even though that's out of necessity. The truth is every character in the story is essential, and their motivations are of course coded into the mainframe of the narrative. Watching it last night, like, I feel like part of the reason why maybe some people wouldn't put it in their top 10 or wouldn't think of it in this way is we've maybe forgotten just how much it spinned everyone on their head. Like, to even try to put yourself in that place of like that first time viewing it. Because the other thing too that I love about rewatching it is that this is not a film that holds the audience's hand. This is a film that just dives deep, and you really can't make sense of it until about halfway through. And so we all watch it now. We know what The Matrix is. There's sequels. There's a fourth one coming out this year. But like, think about it the first time. And that's why, like, a year or two ago when my kids first watched it, it just affirmed my celebration of it, because just to see them in the first 25 minutes be on the edge of their seat, asking me questions, me refusing to answer, and like them just being thrilled by this. On top of all that, the last thing I'll say is just The Matrix has a lot to say about life and purpose, systems, structures, powers, principalities. And it does all of these things in a wildly entertaining kind of way. And these were young filmmakers, the Wachowskis. This was their dream and their goal, going for it. And yet also we see what can be done under restraint, right? Like, they only had so much money. No one knew if this would be successful. No one knew if they would understand what it was. And so they were on very tight restraints with Warner Brothers. And what they pulled off as a result of it is incredible. And we can't pretend that it's not a historic work of cinema, and also, for me, the best film of the 90s. So The Matrix.
Nick, it was number 3 for you, right?
Yeah, I love it. I actually, dude, do you remember we watched this
in Alice and Shuey's basement? That's right.
First time we saw this movie was together. We were 16, 1999, Top of the World.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude. I mean, I just remember feeling like it's, you have those moments where it's like it almost breaks your brain because it's so ahead of stuff, like the bullet time stuff and the I Know Kung Fu sequence. And yeah, man, like the red pill, blue pill thing is iconic. I think that Keanu has gone through like all these iterations, but him as like this sort of like blank avatar in this film actually really works. It's because Neo, like, I think people would criticize maybe Carrie-Anne Moss's performance or their chemistry or whatever. Like there's I guess, like you were saying, Kliner, like there's things that people would level against this movie. But for me, like, all of them kind of work in the context of what it's doing. You know what I mean? Like, Keanu isn't supposed to be Dustin Hoffman in this film. Like, he's supposed to be like this sort of blank guy who kicks well and wears awesome drag stuff. And yeah, it's just like 5 or 6 just incredible sequence. Like when all the weapons fly in on the White Room, and like when they storm that thing at the end and they're climbing up walls, and there's just so many iconic shots. And the very last sequence, I think I just remember like feeling my brain melted. Like, I'm just gonna walk outside and fly now. Like, why not? Like, let's just do it, man. Let's get the heck out of this Matrix and do something. So like,
it also hit me last night watching, like, I've heard the argument, like, in the era of superheroes that we now live, I've heard rightfully people point to, it sounds absurd, but films like Resident Evil, Mila Jovovich, being the first female, but this precedes it. That's what I was thinking last night. Like, Carrie-Anne Moss as an action superhero figure precedes all of that, and because she is right on par, like, she's not a side character, she is driving the ship for most of this film. And what you just said, Nick, about that, even before the final sequence, but because a lot of it hinges on a kiss between them and the climactic moment, and maybe some would argue that's not earned, but for me, it's actually the moment after that, after his resurrection, that I actually genuinely get a little emotional when he flexes and the hallway ripples around him. Like, no truer like visual expression of someone owning one's identity I feel like has never been put on screen. Like it's just like it builds so perfectly to this moment that then presents us with something we've never seen on screen before, and it still gets me. It's just amazing.
I think we forget, or maybe we don't forget, but this movie was an absolute phenomenon. Like it was the only thing similar to a movie that we haven't talked about on this podcast, but like Sixth Sense, in that just like everyone was talking about this.
Right.
Like had this. I mean, the '90s gave us those kind of moments often because it was just a different time, pre ubiquitous internet anyway.
Yeah, right.
And it was just like everywhere. I think it's one of those rare films. Well, it's one of those films that like it's hard for me to separate it now from its sequels, which are both incredibly mediocre. Third, especially, is very bad. So it's really been affected by you see the complete arc of the story now. And it's really, that first movie has really been lessened in my mind because of those second two. Also, just like it's aged beautifully as an action film. It has aged shitty as a piece of philosophy text.
As a piece of philosophy.
It hasn't aged well as like a philosophy for me. Yeah. Adverb form of.
Okay, we need to move on, but take a moment to unpack that for me. What do you mean philosophically it doesn't hold up?
I think like it's one of those movies that's I think looking back on it now, I was like, no wonder I thought it was deep no wonder I thought it was deep when I was 16. I was an idiot when I was 16. This movie is, I think what it's trying to say is cool and fun, but it's not like, oh man, this is life-changing. At least not for me. And I am trying to make fun
We're
of people.
We're living in a time of $1 billion corporation called Meta, and you're telling me that it's not relevant or it doesn't speak to.
I'm not saying it's not relevant. I'm not saying it's not relevant. It was relevant then. It's relevant now. It's not irrelevant. It's just not deep. It's just not deep to me. Like,
oh man, but I mean, okay, I hear what you're saying, but I mean, to be unplugged today versus 1999, to say you are unplugged today has greater like consequences and realities for the life you lead, which then plays right into the parable of this story, which to me is very rich in philosophical meaning.
I'm not saying it's not philosophical. It's not philosophically meaningful. It's just not. It's not one of those movies that made me like rethink life or anymore anyway. Like
sure.
When I was 16, sure, but now it's just not the same. And it's just taken the red pill, blue pill stuff has taken a whole nother life on the internet. Right. And that's a whole can of worms that I don't want to get into, but like,
well, you, as you said earlier, and I can understand this. You're clearly, you interpret the baggage that comes with the social like over history, where for me, I can never separate like that personal moment and impact, and like I just hang on to that irregardless of what it becomes, right? Like
it's undeniable. The impact it had on me when I was 16 is undeniable. It's one of the most important movies of my teenage years, for sure.
Yeah. It's undeniably a great movie. Wait, are you guys cautiously optimistic about this fourth in the franchise? Like, I'm a little skeptical after 2 and 3, but
cautious.
I think it'll be better than 2 and 3, but it won't recreate the first one.
I think it looks to me like they're going back to the roots of the first.
Yeah. That gives me hope. Gives me hope.
Hopefully it'll be good.
Yes, gives me hope. Speaking of hope,
oh God.
My number one is all about hope. And, I said earlier, I am the voice of the people today. Mm-hmm. This movie is undeniably a masterpiece. It is flawless. I watched Bring Out the Dead last night, and it's like, it's midnight. I'm wide awake after that movie. I'm not going to bed. I popped in my number one favorite movie, The Shawshank Redemption, and hit the pillow about 2:30. There are very few, if any, other movies, no matter how many times I watched them. I cried in this movie. I laughed out loud in this movie. I stood up and cheered. No one around me. I'm in a basement by myself at 2 a.m. watching this movie for maybe the 50th time. This might arguably be the most rewatched movie in history. Certainly very rewatchable. The Shawshank Redemption. If you go to Internet Movie Database, you can't argue with this. It is number one. It has been number one on there for decades, and it will be number one on there for the foreseeable future. And so the people have spoken, and I am here to be the voice of the people in my love and adoration for Frank Darabont's actual masterpiece. Kliner is apparently sobered up from day drinking, but a couple hours ago, he mistakenly said The Green Mile was Frank Darabont's masterpiece. It's a fine movie, but this is the one for me. This is incredible.
I
so
also
quotable.
looked up the Internet Movie Database.
I know.
and people love The Green Mile, so I'm not wrong, but whatever. Okay,
People
Shawshank.
love The Green Mile, but it's nowhere near number one.
I will agree that The Shawshank Redemption is better than The Green Mile. That's as far as I'm willing to go.
My favorite part of The Green Mile is Shaq. He's awesome in that.
Well, I'll tell you what, guys, I believe in two things: discipline and the Bible. And here you'll receive both. Put your trust in the Lord. Your ass belongs to me for the next few minutes. Welcome to Shawshank.
Yes.
Tim Robbins, Morgan Freeman. Man, what can I say that hasn't been said about this film? It's flawless. The theme of hope running from start to finish. Deakins again, Roger Deakins. It's such a simple story on the surface. There's nothing flashy about it, but it's so deeply immersive. You're invested in the character start to finish. There's tension in the movie from start to finish. There's suspense. There's comical moments. There's heart-wrenching moments. There's violent moments. I mean, and it all fits together, you know, and people's critiques of Magnolia or Pulp Fiction, where everything doesn't fit together seamlessly or it's too big to all fit together, those are valid. I think that's why this movie works for me and for countless others, because it all fits together. It unrolls and it unpacks so seamlessly, so flawlessly. It's all cohesive. It all fits together. There's not a frame or a scene that's wasted. I want to give kudos to my man Chris Ryan on the Rewatchables. When he did this podcast, he broke it down saying it's really 9 short stories that fit together. And if any of you aspiring screenwriters out there, I think this is great technique. You know, just break it down into bite-sized chunks. Frank Darabont knows he's not Martin Scorsese. He knows he's not Stanley Kubrick, right? So he's taking what he's able to do, and it's perfect. So we got 9 short stories in this film. You got Fresh Fish, Andy and the Sisters, Beer on the Roof, one of the most iconic scenes ever. Brooks Was Here, The Opera, Tommy, The Escape, Red's Release, and Mexico. Kind of 9 little montage. And in each of those 9 sections of the film, you've got some lighter moments, you've got some harrowing moments, you've got some suspense, edge of your seat. You really don't know how things are going to play out. And even though I know how things are going to play out, having watched it 50 times, every time I come back, I'm still on the edge of my seat for some of these scenes. I mean, Tim Robbins is great in this. Imagine it was someone else in this film. Apparently they were thinking of casting like Tom Cruise as this role. You almost need someone who's not that well known in Hollywood to play this role, so you don't associate him with someone else. I mean, he's this tall, skinny, he's kind of carrying the weight of his world on his shoulders throughout this film. Unjustly imprisoned. You got Morgan Freeman. I mean, what a decade for Morgan Freeman. We're going to share briefly our most valuable performer of the decade. I get on my list, it's Morgan Freeman. You know, from Seven to this movie, just incredible performances. And voiceover doesn't always work for me in films, but it does here. I think the fact that he's giving the narrative, I think it helps the movie move along well. It's well paced, and it explores that theme of hope as deep as any film does, right? Is hope an enemy? Is hope a friend? Is hope going to ultimately be realized? And it's a platonic love story between 2 guys, right? It's, you know, Morgan Freeman and Tim Robbins. To see their relationship evolve and blossom throughout this film, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. I can't wait till my kids are old enough where I can watch with them. I know we joke it's a quintessential dad movie, and maybe we use that as a pejorative. I don't know what dad movie means, but I know it's a great movie. It's a masterpiece, and it's one of my all-time favorites. Shawshank Redemption. Should have won Best Picture over Forrest Gump that year. It kind of flopped out of the gate too, which is interesting. It's interesting to see the history of this film.
Yeah.
Who else had it on their list? Anyone?
No one.
Millions of Internet Movie Database folks.
Rebecca always Rebecca, my girlfriend, she always makes fun of me because she says my sweet spot for movies is when a movie is well reviewed, but the audience score is low. And that is true because I often find movies that are earnest to the point of like, I mean, this is one of the most earnest movies ever made to me. And that stuff is really, really difficult for me. With the exception on my list is actually Good Will Hunting, which is also a very earnest movie in a lot of ways. This movie is just like, I think the biggest insult that I can give this movie is that it's a movie that my parents love. You know, like it's just not for me. It's just not the kind of movie that makes me happy. I think it's fun. It's fine. I enjoy it.
Roger Ebert, 4 stars. So there's that.
It's really well. No, I mean it's extremely well reviewed movie. I mean,
yeah.
It's just I think the earnestness and the message for me is just not something. Like I said, I'm dead inside. So I think that's part of the problem.
I think it's like the rewatchable thing is too. Like for me, I don't know what channels you guys haven't, but we have TNT. Like the TNT rerun cycle of this movie when I was a kid, it was like every summer, all the time. It really might be my dad's favorite movie. Like in all honesty, I don't know. He'd have some other ones up there, but it's up there. But then I rewatched it recently. It was one of the, like I said, I pulled one from each of you guys' lists in order to make room for T2. And Shawshank was the one from Tripp's list because I actually do think it holds together and it's good. I mean, I think it's more like classic Hollywood filmmaking, really, to me, like Hawks or Wilder. It's just, like you said, man, there's not a lot of like, it's artful in its like presentation of a great story, right? Not in like cool tricks with cameras or scores or things, although the score is good.
Also, maybe one of the reasons it's #1 over like Godfather or others on IMDb is maybe because it's not tied to a certain genre that will be hit and miss. Like it just connects with so many universal themes that appeal to the masses, right? Whereas I love The Godfather. I think it's one of the best films ever made, but not everybody's into the gangster genre, like Goodfellas. Whereas this movie, it cuts across genres and just brings together some of those universal themes that'll connect with multi-generations. And so I think that's pretty telling. Take it or leave it. I mean, yeah. So, sorry, Scott, I cut you off there.
No, you're fine. I hate to, I'm not like, because I really do enjoy this movie. I make a lot of jokes about how this movie is like my parents' favorite movie, but I do enjoy this movie. I think you said it for me, where it's like the mass appeal of a movie like this often makes me not like a movie as much, because I'm like, if everyone universally loves a movie like this, there's nothing in there challenging thematically or storytelling wise. It's a very digestible and easy story to watch. And some people value that, and some people are like, I want to be more challenged when I'm watching a movie. So I that for me, it's a very personal thing, because I enjoy this movie, but it's not one for me that's like,
if they threw in like puppets or something, that might have been better for you.
Yes. Or like songs that don't make sense. Stuff like that.
Performing cunnilingus. There we go.
Exactly.
People are like, what are they talking about? Well, that's a little, you're gonna have to come back and watch our year this now.
It's time, guys. You ready? I'm gonna introduce
All right.
What are we doing now? What's going on?
Time's up now? Oh, yeah, that's a wrap.
We gotta go?
Oh, no.
I'm gonna sit down for this one.
This is Furman's #1?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's do it. Let's do it, man.
Now on to a film that Scott really truly doesn't like. Actually doesn't like. Okay, guys, I want to introduce you to a man. His name's Cameron Crowe. Okay, he was a writer for a magazine. You may have heard of it, music magazine called Rolling Stone. Penned a little script called Fast Times at Ridgemont High in the 80s. You know, just a good, modest hit later on, circa 1989. Say Anything. Let's skip forward a decade to one of the best films of the 2000s, Almost Famous. And then right in the middle of that is, a masterpiece.
When do we talk about We Bought a Zoo?
Yeah, that's it. So, We Bought a Zoo. We're going to leave that over here, okay?
That's the popcorn, Kliner.
There you go, man.
And Aloha. Can I have some of that? And in 1996, he made a little film called Jerry Maguire. okay, which is my favorite film from the 90s, okay? This is great. Look at you guys look so entertained. Hey, I checked the national, international, and internet movable movie database, and it's no. Where is it on the IMDb? It's pretty high, right? People like this movie, and you guys don't. I do. Oh wow, he looks so bored. Okay, let me tell you about this movie. Here's what I'm gonna say. It's one of the 10 most quotable movies ever. Yes, GIFs are made about it constantly to this day, spread around the internet. It hits the sweet spot.
There's two. You had me at hello and show me the money.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the other ones? I don't know.
Who's coming with me?
Yeah, who's coming with me? I love black people. How about that one?
That's a good
Okay.
one.
Yeah,
I took that one to
that's
heart.
aged really well.
No, it has. And let's see. No, look, there's great sports movies and then there's great rom-coms, but there's very few great sports movie rom-coms, okay? I'm going to argue for one in the 80s, which hopefully Tripp will give me a little more love on, that I have a little higher than this. But this one is phenomenal, and I love it. And it has an awesome soundtrack, great Bruce Springsteen song, and it's very quotable. And I actually think this is genuinely a great film. I do. Like this song, here's why Scott hates this film. This film has an immense amount of soul, okay? And as a monist, I don't know if he believes in souls. But it does. This movie makes me feel. And also, by the way, freaking Cuba Gooding completely reinvents sports personalities in this film with his performance. Like, this is not only as an African-American performer, but in breaking the mold, he's phenomenal. So anyway, I love Jerry Maguire. It is my number one. You're all very rude.
Nick,
and what?
Tell us more about it, man. Tell us about Tom Cruise. Like, there's more to love about it.
Nick, did you know that the human head weighs 8 pounds?
That was perfect.
Perfect.
That
and
was
that
perfect.
kid's great too. His head is massive.
Jonathan, thank you, man.
Look, I honestly, genuinely think this is a great Tom Cruise performance because Tom Cruise is great at being a movie star and he's great at having charisma, and he has it in spades in this movie, even as he's sort of falling apart. So I actually think this is one of his truly great performances. I know you can quibble with the Cameron Crowe directing a football film, but I think it's quite good. And it's
talk about earnest. This movie is earnest. It really goes for it. I mean, you saying the Bruce Springsteen song is a great song. Oh boy. Of all the problems I have, Secret Garden being one of Bruce Springsteen's great songs is one of the many problems I have with this movie.
It's a return to form. I mean, he was great in the 80s.
Oh God. Yeah, I don't like this movie. Like,
Okay, hold on. You actually don't like this movie, Scott?
Yeah, I think it's bad.
Oh, well, that's the wrong take. That's not true. Tripp, you like this movie, right, Tripp?
I haven't seen it in years. It's fine. It's okay.
All right, well, I'm going to go to bat for Furman then, because I do like this movie a lot. I love this movie too. It's on my shelf. I would probably, it's like as rewatchable as Shawshank in my mind, but it's not a great movie. It's not, but I love Furman for elevating it. And I didn't want any of our silliness to disrupt your eloquence about why it means something to you. It might even
hoping to ruin it.
Actually, Scott, you had the best moment. Scott, oh, there you go. I was saying
thrift store, $2. So
thrift store.
I pulled the trigger.
Furman, this was 96, right?
Right.
I mean, it could be argued like this was the turning point for Cruise in his career, because you wouldn't have 99 with Magnolia and Eyes Wide Shut without this turning point, right? Which was the convergence of a lot of things, like you said, a convergence of his career and his artistry, and where he took a real. I mean, again, let us not speak of Vanilla Sky, but just saying like that is a transition phase, right? In his life and career, which then we're in a whole other phase of his career now. But there was something really beautiful and fascinating about his, well, as you guys would say, flexing, right? Like showing the variety of skills that he genuinely has as a performer, and we forget sometimes. We forget that he's a kick-ass actor. Like, he's just awesome.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that he has to play across Renee Zellweger in this movie. It's unfortunate for Tom Cruise.
You think she's bad, you mean?
I just don't like her as a performer in general.
I don't either, but I think this is her one great role. And I think that actually
I agree.
Elevates it for me. I think her playing, I understand she's playing a type, but I think that the type she plays is exceptionally good. And I agree. Like, I think this is Cruise's whole bag of tricks, man. Like, this is his spinning with the cue, playing pool and Color of Money, like, across a film. I mean, he runs in this movie, he cries way too much in this film. He laughs, he sings Free Falling at the top of his lungs. He's wearing shades, and he's just getting in on the biz, man. So I love sports movies. I'll be the first. Like, I'm thinking about doing a sports movie Hall of Fame like I did with horror films. And yes, dude, I understand. This is saccharine. I get it. But I would be lying if I said, like, it's a family favorite. I'm not the only one in my family that loves this film. But yeah, that would be my defense of it.
Number one. It's a travesty.
Well, I think we all kind of do things. At least I'm being honest. I mean, your number one should have been Pulp Fiction, or your number four, but so I mean, like, whatever. It should have been Lebowski if you're being honest. You know what I mean? But whatever.
Let's move on. But I just want to say one thing, because you're making me think this maybe for the first time, that, like, oh gosh, now I'm forgetting the director's name.
Cameron Crowe.
What?
Cameron Crowe.
Cameron Crowe. Sorry, thank you. Like, Cameron Crowe, like, it's sort of, he has this reputation that there's Almost Famous that came after this, right? So that could argue that would be inarguably his greatest work. But it's like him in music, it's his greatest strength and his greatest weakness.
Yeah.
Because upon rewatch of Jerry Maguire, it's like there are moments where it's like the music cues or the needle drops are driving the ship that feel inauthentic. It's like, oh, this wasn't where we were going that last moment, right? But because the music queued up, like, oh, that's where we're going now. Like, he uses music in ways that very few other directors do. His soundtracks are amazing, but their use in film sometimes it's contrived, I think. So, but again, he's made great films, and this is a very, very good film in my opinion. But anyways. All right. Well, Scott's going to really lift our spirits now with his number one. So,
I mean, it should lift your spirits because it's incredibly moving and beautiful and human, and just one of the best films ever made, ever. It would be in my top 3 movies of all time, without a doubt. It is Abbas Kiarostami's Close Up. This movie is basically 3 things at once. It is a reenactment, it is a documentary, and then it is a drama as well. What he accomplishes in this movie is hard to explain, and it's going to make me sound like a pretentious person just by explaining what this movie is. I'm going to sound pretentious, but this movie is a group of real people that had real experiences, and then this is put on film. So this guy decided to pretend that he was a famous Iranian filmmaker. The director of that director his name is escaping me, but the most famous Iranian filmmaker besides Abbas Kiarostami, this gentleman decided he was going to basically scam a family and pretend to be this filmmaker, and then they would go down this road of like making a movie, and he's like in their house and eating dinner with them, and he is basically over the course of months pretending to be someone that he's not, and scamming this family. And what Kiarostami decides to do is to use the real people that went through this real situation, and then reenact what happened with them. almost exactly reenact what happened, because he's taking their actual words and their actual experiences and then putting them and then dramatizing them with the actual people. And then it's interspliced with scenes from his actual trial for doing this in a courtroom, which is very different than an American courtroom, because Kiarostami's in the actual courtroom and the judge actually allows him to ask questions of this man who is accused of this crime, of pretending to be someone that he's not and scamming this family. And then the end of this movie, I hate to spoil it, but I'm going to anyway, because it's just the actual filmmaker that this man is pretending to be confronts this man on the street, and they have this beautiful conversation with each other. They get on a motorcycle together. You're not sure. The sound is cutting in and out. You're not sure if it's intentional or unintentional that the sound is cutting in and out. It is such a beautiful and human story. And it's made in a way that is so creative and so unique. It's hard to put into words the experience I had watching this. It really did redefine what movies can be for me. Kiarostami in general has done that with his earlier work as well. It's not the first time he's went into the meta. It's kind of his whole deal in a lot of ways. But he kind of redefines what storytelling can be and what the bounds and the constraints of cinema are. He just completely changes them for me with this movie. And he manages to find this way. And I think there's part of me that is more into these movies because it's specifically Iran. I find myself as an American, we have this preconceived notion of what Iran is. And so when we see these real human moments with Iranian people, it is more impactful for me, where I'm like, oh, I'm not that different than a human being in Iran. No matter what I've been told, we all experience the same kind of emotions, longing to be something in the world, longing to be more than we actually are in the world. And it causes us to do things that we probably shouldn't. And this is an astounding piece of art, and it's about as unique a film as has ever been put on camera. It's incredible.
It is an incredible film. I was gifted the opportunity to surprise myself with this as number 4. And the truth is, like, I probably wouldn't have been ready for this film 10 years ago. I wouldn't have been able to, like, because you're making me even just think of, like, you know, and we made reference to this earlier, but before the break, made reference that, like, my experience watching Close Up is very reminiscent of my experience watching in 2020 First Cow by Kelly Reichardt. Reichardt. And it makes me also think, I mean, it's different, but it makes me think of watching this year's Pig. That, okay, apparently I'm in a very different space now in my life of what I can appreciate and find tremendous. I'm not finding anything new, but the quiet films are quieting me, and Close Up did that for me. Now I'll even say this: I watched it twice. The first time, I didn't even fully grasp the whole what's documentary, what's not. I didn't even fully grasp what I was watching, a documentary, which is mostly what it is. And it wasn't until, like, reading about it and then rewatching it a second time, I was like, oh my word, like, I didn't, like, because Kiarostami, he's in it, like, he appeared, like, the back of his head at least, and his voice appears in certain scenes, and that went over my head the first time. But, like, this, and most of this film, I just want to say the Close Up, it's mind-boggling. The beauty of it is elevated. Like, you're watching it, you're immersed, you're tying yourself with human beings for us, we have no relationship with, in a different culture and country and language, and I'm just tied right with them because they're talking about pursuing meaning and vocation and finding those things almost exclusively in art, and therefore you're placing yourself in art, and art imitates life and life imitates art, and you're like just swept up in that beauty, and then the film stops and you read about it or you think about it and you're like, oh, and on top of that there were all of these masterful things at work where, I mean, there's three things going on in 90 minutes. I mean, there's like a 15-minute prologue, and there's like a 15-minute conclusion, and there's 60 minutes in the middle that's almost exclusively just trial footage, just sitting in a room, close-ups of people talking in a courtroom. And yeah, the courtroom in Iran is very different and fascinating. If anything, I see the benefits. Like, the model is fascinating because it's putting people in reconciling positions to actually forgive one another in the same space. It's fascinating. But the prologue sets it up like I don't know if I've ever seen a better opening of a film, because one, at first you have no idea what you're doing, what's going on. You feel like you're literally being driven because you're just following this journalist in a car, and he's telling us, as he's telling his driver, what's going on and what he's doing. And then while this is going on, they're stopping and asking for directions. And they're like, I think it's this street. Oh, no, it's this street. And they ask another person for directions. And then apparently there's police. The two guys sitting in the back are police officers. And you're like, what? Do they not have their own? Like, why are police officers riding in a taxi? That's a cultural thing I don't understand. They get out with the journalists, go into this home they've been talking about to talk with this family and to arrest this man. But the camera stays with the taxi driver outside, and we're seeing planes go by and birds fly by and a spray can that rolls down the street. We just watch it roll down the street, and you're just like, what is going on? Like, what is, like, and then we go through all this trial and we get to the last 15 minutes and we revisit all of that scene in a complete, like, but we follow the action inside the house, which then you realize later is all reenacted, mind-blowing. And yet I'm still in suspense as I'm watching, even though I know exactly what's about to happen, I'm in suspense watching the main character wait in this room, pretend to be who he's not, and see this journalist come in, and they go to talk in another room, and I'm like, it's, and then of course, and then as you talked about, then the ending with the motorcycle, it's touching and moving in a way that I can't even articulate. Because again, this man, where life and art are not separated. He cannot in his brain separate film from real life, and art and his day-to-day life that converges in an embrace.
Hearing you talk about this movie, I'm like, you have to watch all the other Kiarostami movies, dude. Because if you like this one, you're gonna love the rest of them too.
Yeah, no, and I'm so grateful for it. Yeah, so grateful for Close Up.
Another convert, Scott. There you go.
Yeah, man. The way Kiarostami blends high art with humanity is just, it's unlike anything I've ever seen. It's why Kiarostami is probably my all-time favorite director. Is like, I love high art films, and I want also a human element to those stories, and there's no one that does it like him. Like, no one. Like, not even close. So it's just a stunning piece of work, and it's so relatable, and it's beautiful, and I am obsessed with this movie. Obsessed with it.
Nice. It's great. It's masterful. It's such an important film. Now, Nick, when you watched Jerry Maguire for the first time, did it like blow you away on what is possible with cinema?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I couldn't resist.
It's like, yeah, sure did.
Definitely.
It blew me away on what was possible with Kelly Preston as 13-year-old.
Oh my word. Oh my word.
I watched it with my dad. I was like, okay, well, this is awkward. Wait, I think we should say, though, if you want to start with a Kiarostami that's maybe a little more digestible for a modern audience, Certified Copy is a hell of a flick, too.
Yes.
That's a great film.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's easily digestible, but it is an amazing film.
Now, none of this stuff's really easily digestible, but it's important and it's beautiful.
I mean, like,
with Close Up, I love Close Up too, and it almost made my list. I love the bookends. For me, I struggle with the excessively long trial courtroom stuff. That's
me too.
that's where, if I'm being honest, now I don't want to deter from saying that, like, everyone should watch this movie repeatedly. That's because, as Kliner said, sometimes it takes repeat viewing, and my repeat viewing was much more rewarding when I watched it the first time, like a decade ago. Maybe I wasn't ready for it then either. So yeah,
I think
you gotta let it breathe.
Yeah, the courtroom stuff is tedious, almost intentionally so. But there's moments, there's nuggets of the things that this guy says about like who he wishes he was rather than who he is. It's just a stunning piece of humanity.
Yeah, and just from an intercultural engagement perspective too, just opening up our eyes to the Iranian culture, right? The courtroom and like, and the compassion in there too, right? Because we have a lot of presuppositions and about what the Middle East is like, and Kiarostami really helps sort of deconstruct that and pull back the veil.
If I'm ever pulled into court, I want this judge to be my judge. Like, I've never seen a judge. Again, it's documentary footage, so no one's performing, but like so compassionate and understanding, and always aiming toward reconciliation. So like that whole societal structure thing was engaging me in terms of thought provoking, but then just the close up of the protagonist, I can't think of his last name, but just his face. Like I just was so captivated by his face, and again, like, as you said, as he's talking about this is just his life. This is real to him. And anyways, great.
Yeah, I love that movie.
Nice.
All right.
Well, that's a wrap. No, very quickly. Most important director of the decade, most important performer of the decade. For me, I'll start. It's got to be the Coens for me. I mean, 3 of their films were mentioned. This is what put them on the map this decade. And I think I had 3 movies in this decade with Morgan Freeman. So I guess he's my guy for this decade. What about you guys?
I don't know. Like I didn't think about this question very hard. And looking at my list, I mean, you can give it to Tarantino, you can give it to Spielberg, you could give it. We didn't talk about him, but you could give it to Tom Hanks, or you could give it to Tom Cruise. Give it to the Toms. Yeah. Give it to Tarantino. Like, you know what I mean? Like they, just the scope of it all, right? Like it was pretty special.
Well, the Coens made 5 movies in the 90s, right? I mean, that's pretty unreal.
That's crazy.
But my personal pick would probably be Tarantino, just because I love all 3 of them.
Yeah.
And I would lean towards Tom Cruise because of the 299 performances, and then Jerry Maguire for me, like in terms of a personal thing. But
it's solid.
A Few Good Men, was that 90s?
I think so, isn't it? 91, 90?
Yeah.
I thought it was 80.
Oh, maybe.
Oh, it's 92, I think.
Yeah,
92, yeah.
So I mean, quite the decade for Cruise, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think Cruise is the answer. Cruise or Hanks is the answer.
Yeah.
Even though maybe not all the films are my cup of tea. But the best director of the decade for me is like Kiarostami, and it's not. I mean, he made, I think, 5 films that I am absolutely obsessed with.
Yeah, Taste of Cherry didn't get mentioned. That's another one, right?
Yeah.
Well, we better wrap this up, or it's going to be longer than that 4-hour runtime from A Brighter Summer Day. So hopefully brighter summer days are ahead, even though we're getting into the winter season for everyone. And on those cold winter nights, you have a long list of movies to revisit now, or to visit for the first time, maybe close up or other ones. So thanks for slugging it out with us. And thanks, guys. Thanks, Kliner, Furman, Zip. Let's do it again. Maybe we'll get into the 80s down the road, or as we get into Oscar season there in the new year, we'll definitely talk about some of our favorites from this year too. So
thanks, guys.
Get busy living or get busy dying.
Yeah.